Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. Here to provide staff report today is Jim Burke, Director of our Parks and Recreation.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. Mayor and council, good afternoon. This is an opportunity to bring you an item that we've been working on for a couple of years. Somehow it's not advancing. It's not advancing. What's? Oh, there it goes. My sorry. Operator error, excuse me. This is about the park irrigation system and our monitoring of it, and it has to do with turf irrigation and our drip irrigation. And it's an informative session for the council, and we're not seeking council consensus or direction at this point. So the goal is to use technology to help us reduce water use, primarily through the application of telemetry controllers. These are controllers that collect data on how the water is being used and when, and then transmits it remotely through the phone system to a central location where it then can be monitored and controlled. It includes installation of flow meters so we can actually tell if water is running when it should or should not be running. The use of evapotranspiration rates, which is calculation of the climate, the actual condition of what's going on in the Glendale area, not just an annual schedule of turf watering, and then routine monitoring. We originally entered into the contract in 2017. The contractor, the business sold to another entity, modified that. We made an amendment that the council approved in 2019. And then in April 2019, we began the installation of materials. They put equipment in 19 of our parks. And then in 2020, they came back and put equipment in 37 additional parks for a total of 56 parks to now have these controllers in them and this telemetry information or material. The contractor has invested $1.3 million to doing that work, the capital cost for the material. At the end of the contract period, it's all city-owned, and since it's on our system. So looking at performance, this chart takes a look at the first year, and it's the contract year, so April to March. It's not a calendar year or fiscal year, I apologize, just a slightly different way of looking at it. But the yellow line is our baseline, which is a calculation for water use over a 5-year period that we use. And then the orange is the actual water use for that period, for that first year. You can see we were underneath our baseline, and they were saving water with this control system on these 56 parks. That pattern continues in year 2, contract year 2020. In 2021, which was the really hot, dry year, we'll all remember. And in 2022. So these are an overview of what's going on. I wanted to show you some calculations. So we saved 63 million gallons of water in 19, and 95 million in 2020, and then in 2021, 98, and in 2022, 117, for a total of 374,890,000 gallons of water. We're pretty pleased with that. That's a pretty high number of water savings over this 4-year period. It is still just a fraction of the total water we're using in the park system, but it's a great starting point with these 56 parks. We've also paid the contractor per the terms of the contract. This is a performance contract, so as they save, they're getting paid out of our water budget, our utility line budget, and we've paid them over that same period of time $1.745 million. We have saved in total a little over $2 million. So the park system, the utility line is kept about $308,000 that we then use for covering costs and expense. So we've learned over this that we really need to have an intensive interaction with the contractor every month about what they're doing, what they're seeing, the interactions that are happening from their remote monitoring. We are obligated under the terms of the contract to do the irrigation repairs. And as you all know from all of your constituent calls, we do have issues with repairs all over the park system. Part of it's aging infrastructure and the condition out there. And then use and vandalism, whether somebody drives on the park with a four-wheel drive or just kids playing with sprinkler heads, but we were constantly working on and fixing that. And that has been one of our primary challenges with this contract, is keeping up with the work. And we've had some issues with quality of turf and coordination with the contractor. And by that, I mean, it's a performance contract, and they're motivated to not have the irrigation on. And if there's a repair that needs to be happening, they were pushing their remote button and turning off the water. And some of you have called saying a particular park in your area is brown or having issues with turf quality, and that's a fact. So we have been working on that balance to manage this system so we're saving money, saving water, which is our principal goal, which is the important resource, but also having viable turf and decent-looking parks. And we're making progress on it, but it's not 100%. And over the next couple of years, this contract, we'll work on tightening that up and getting better at that. And then our next step is to continue monitoring this, continue improving our management and our understanding of how the operation works, tighten up the coordination with this contractor. And we wanted to come to the council today so that you would know that we've had these expenses that have gone through the contract. They've been covered in our utility budget, but nonetheless, we'll be coming back with an item to ratify expenses, and we'll have the future expenses, the remaining 2.5 years of the contract. As their performance continues, if it's been like it has, we'll probably have about an additional $1.5 million of expenses that will go to this contractor. And with that, I'll be glad to take questions.
Mayor, thank you. Now it looks like I just seen under the goal. I already answered my question. Many citizens calls City Hall on sprinklers that have lost their nozzle and water runs all over the street. This system has a flow metering device in it that will allow it to shut off that zone, not the whole park. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct on the parks where they have the system. So it's not every park in our network.
That will have the system.
In the 56, they can do that. Yes, sir.
Okay, just a question. Thank you.
Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor. So can you, I want to make sure I understand. So if there's an issue, then somehow this system transmits a message to the vendor that there's a problem and they turn it off. They turn off the whole system at that location? Is that what they do, or?
The system is automatic, so and it's real time. So yes, their base station is always getting updates from all these systems, and they can see when they're monitoring that. They don't have somebody 24/7, so they would note it when they look at it. But yes, they can go into the system and turn off something, as Councilman just asked, a particular zone, or they can turn off the whole park. So if it's an unknown of why it is, or it's a really big event, they might turn off the whole park.
So is there a gap between that happening and them notifying us that we need to make the repair? Is that where there's a delay in us knowing that we need to go out there and take care of it?
There can be a gap because most of the parks, especially in the summer months when we're watering the most, are watering every night. So they expect to see them come on and have a flow. They have to notice an irregular or unusual flow or an odd time. So if the flow was supposed to shut off at 7 in the morning, but it's still going at 8, that's when we might get a notice from them that, hey, something's not right. But we had an incident recently where one of the parks had a line break. Water was running, but it was running when it was supposed to be irrigating. And they didn't catch that or notify us that they could see an anomaly until they had come in and it ran past the time it was scheduled to run. And they let us know, and then we responded. And then, yes, to your second question, is then it's our responsibility to go out and do that repair. And depending on what breaks, whether it's a single head that might be vandalized or whether it's a lateral line or a main line, it could be the whole park is shut down for some period of time. And we've had that case where it takes a week or more to get in and fix a main line that might be a 2-inch line or bigger versus a lateral or a simple repair that might just take a couple of days.
One more question, Mayor. Is this system being, is this on a trial basis? Are we converting to this, or what is the status?
We implemented this as a trial basis over a couple of years, and we have a few more left in the contract. Our goal would be to continue to evaluate this and then look at other technologies and other operators and maybe do an RFP or an RFQ before this is ended to see if there's another contractor. But yes, I do think the goal is to head to this kind of operation and to have it in all the parks. So that's on all our irrigation system, which will be an additional cost, and we'll have to explore all that and come to you.
Right. I would imagine the technology's advanced some between 2017 and now also in this type of whatever the system they're using. I mean, we can't keep up with, I'm sure it's advanced and there might be better monitoring systems and systems available at that point. I do have one other question. Is this being tried at any of the parks that are using effluent water, or is it just potable water?
That's a very good question. Right now, it is just potable water sites.
Is there, because of the issue sometimes with sprinklers and effluent water, is that why it's not being tried? Are we going to try at least maybe one park that uses that just to see, or?
We're certainly open to doing that and adding it to our list of things. Right now, we just did that because the principal goal was to save water and to save cost at first use of water. The reclaimed water is already a second use of the water, so we
Right.
figured that was a second tier. We also have some parks where we water from SRP canal or from a lake that's filled from SRP, so it's raw water. And we're not managing and controlling those yet on the irrigation side, but it would be an ultimate goal to get to that level too.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay.
Did you want to speak or?
You or me first?
Either one.
Thank you, Mayor. I know that the total cost for the past 4 years has been 1.7 million, and that we've saved considerable water. How does the amount of water convert into dollars so that we know that this is paying for itself? Do you have a figure on what the dollar savings has been in water?
Yes, the total water we saved was that 370 million gallons of water, and the dollar amount was, for the total period of time, was a little over $2 million, of which we paid them 1.7.
Okay, so we're saving at least $2 million in water, and we're paying 1.7. So we are, in fact, the system is paying for itself. Whether this pilot project becomes permanent or not, in terms of its usefulness, we know that dollar-wise, it's a good investment.
Mayor, members of council, yes, that's our understanding and looking at this and how it's working right now. And it's covering the capital costs that they put up front. So they're recovering that cost, and then they're recovering their operating cost. And over the life of it, they will, of course, make a profit too. But in the total budget for our utilities for covering water costs, this seems to be an efficient way to go.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm very impressed with the volume of water you've been able to save with this project. It looks very, very good, and we want to continue that. And you've kind of explained the nature of the work that they're doing when they go in to install this. Are they upgrading any of our irrigation systems in this process, or are they just putting in an automated control box, more or less?
Mayor, members of council, initially they just put in the automation and the control box, as you said, and some valves and some control devices that then reports back to their system. They made a proposal to us to do some irrigation upgrades. We chose not to do that initially because that would have been an out-of-pocket cost to us directly. And the original idea, and it was before I was here, but was not to have any direct out-of-pocket costs from Glendale, that it would come out of the budget savings in the process. As we look at it going forward, that is something we'll want to look at. In our current CIP, there are a number of irrigation upgrade projects. One the Vice Mayor's been waiting on patiently in her district, which is Grand Canal Linear Park, but then there's about 5 parks that were funded with ARPA funds because water conservation was one of those goals, and we're getting started on those. We have contractors in place. We're doing the field work. We're doing that analysis. That contractor's meeting with this contractor so that they can talk and we can make sure that we coordinate. We don't want to do any repairs on their side of the line, so to speak, where their boxes are and their utilities. But we might redesign that park. There might be a change in laterals, number of heads, type of heads, how the water gets distributed. What we're finding is a lot of these parks, they were designed and implemented over a number of different decades. They have different standards. So sometimes the water, the sprinklers just barely touch each other. Sometimes they overlap by a little bit. In today's modern standard, if you look at a golf course, for instance, the goal is for the sprinkler head to overlap 100% head-to-head coverage so that you get all the ground in between fully watered. I can't say that we can do that now in our current park system. You've all got parks where you went to and you've seen the circles where we're not getting complete coverage and you have gaps. A couple of reasons for that. One is the design, the layout of the system, and that original intent was head-to-head touching, not overlap. and then water pressure. The water pressure that's being delivered, there's nothing wrong with it, but the design standards for operating our systems are higher, and we didn't compensate for that. So we're expecting we're going to have to go in and put individual pump stations at each park to raise that level so we can operate the heads more efficiently and get better control of the water. But that's a lesson learned that we wouldn't have known when we started this.
Okay. Thank you. I have a few other questions. I appreciate that comment because that's really where I was kind of going with this question is I believe that our parks do have a lot of deficiencies in their irrigation system. And I was hoping that this process was going to help alleviate that somewhat. It looks like mainly what we're shooting for here is savings in water, being more efficient with the water, not necessarily improving the look. So that was my next question. With these new systems, because of an automated system that can control it better, are we finding improvements in the looks of the park because of this system itself? Or is it still going to go to that next step where we're going to have to go in and do some major line repairs and replacements?
Mayor, members of the council, I think it's a combination of both. In a few instances, I think we've got acceptable standard of turf and the system's not creating a problem or underwatering. I do think in some of our parks, the baseline was low because we weren't watering efficiently when we did the measure, and now we're watering below that. So I think we have to compensate for that. We do have a condition in the contract to balance quality of turf. And that's just been a little bit of pushback between us and the contractors. Their goal is to make money and to save water, so we're constantly doing that. I think as we go forward and we rebuild these irrigation systems and make some modifications, we'll get closer to that ultimate goal, and you'll start seeing better turf quality.
Okay, well, that is my concern, if I may, Mayor, is it appears that our turf quality in at least the parks in my district needs some improvement. And I was hoping this water system would help that, but apparently that's not really changing the overall turf condition. And I think we really need to evaluate that in the next fiscal year if we want to allocate some of our monies to accommodate that, because parks are such a big part of our communities, especially our community parks that are surrounded by neighborhoods. And they see these bald spots and spots that aren't quite irrigated because of our system, and we really need to start working on that. So I'd appreciate us discussing that in the future. Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Actually, probably more for the manager. Do we have this presentation's been on parks. Do we have a similar system in place for our right-of-way? And if not, are we considering moving that direction?
I believe I know the answer to this, but just in case, I'll ask our Director of Transportation come up, Shahid Abbas. Again, this was a kind of a performance-based contract that we initiated, and so I don't think we do, but...
Mayor and the council member, we are going to place similar system as part of landscape plan, which you have approved and is a part of this budget. So we'll start that project next year. So we're
Very
in the
good. Thank
process
you.
of designing their system. Thank you.
That's it.
That's it? All right. I'm just going to make a statement. I wish that we had more vendors that could pull off this type of miracle. I mean, when you think about it, water is the number one thing you hear people talking about today here in the Valley. And we're saving money more than, I mean, what a perfect duo. We're saving money. Our parks are more reliable. I think they can get better. But before, we were just simply had water being run and nobody knew where it was at. We didn't know it for days. And so, no, I think maybe we need to make this particular vendor a hero of the week or something. I think this is pretty cool. But I look forward to you bringing us more things like this. And if there are other people that do the same type thing and we have a chance to bid that, but I'm happy with what we have. This is not truly a pilot program now. I mean, this is actually a program that we have a contract on. Still have another 2 years on this, don't we?
Mayor, members of council, yes, that's correct. It's just that it's only 56% of the parks, and we have about 90, so it's not
Yeah.
the whole system yet.
Yeah, I'd love to eventually work to where we have them all covered, but no, great job. Thanks for bringing this to us. What do you need from us right now?
That's it, thank you.
Okay, all right. Item number 2. Thank you.
Council item of special interest, retiree health care.
Mayor, members of the council, here to provide staff report is Jim Brown, our Director of Human Resources and Risk Management.
Do we have? There it is. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Phelps, and good afternoon, Mayor and members of the council. The purpose of this presentation is to discuss a council item of special interest that was brought forward by Councilmember Aldama, and it's related to retiree health care, and essentially to seek direction from the council in terms of whether you'd like to see a more in-depth analysis of retiree health care for the city of Glendale. And the scope of There we go. And the scope of that presentation would include the following. There would be a briefing over what the City of Glendale currently does for our retirees. There are a few things that we do offer, but certainly not the robust health care. Then also to discuss the overview of the City of Mesa, who just recently implemented retiree health care for their organization. So we would bring a presentation to the council to go over what they're doing, what that plan looks like, and what the impact is. The impact also whether if we can get the information of whether or not it has an impact on retention and that type of thing. Then also what other cities may be considering a retiree health care plan similar. And then finally, an analysis of what it would take to implement a retiree health care plan similar to Mesa's for the city of Glendale. Staff would work with the city's benefit consultant to develop that retiree model and to bring that forward to the council. It would take us around 6 weeks to work with the consultant to overlay Mesa's plan onto Glendale's consensus or census, employee census, and bring that forward. And it would cost approximately $45,000 to $50,000 in working with that consultant. So with that, certainly open to any questions that you might have and seeking consensus to move this forward.
Well, thank you. I'll give my 2 cents worth and then we'll open it up for everybody. I think we certainly need to look at this. The city manager has the ability to spend up to $50,000. I was sort of surprised when this came to us, but I'm sure that he wants all of us to be aware of it. He could do this on his own anyway, but I personally don't know why we wouldn't want to look at this. If we have the ability to maybe keep some people working longer, would be a benefit. And then I'd just like to see what you guys can come up with. I know this was brought up by Councilmember Aldama. I'm going to go to him next, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Brown, thank you for following up on this item. In a recent survey, not recent as the last couple of weeks, but a recent survey, employees of the city of Glendale stated that health benefits was #1 priority for employees in our organization. That's organizational wide. Mesa originally created this policy just for public safety, and then they went out for all of the organization, and that's what this proposal is to seek what it would cost and what it would look like to provide post-retiree health care benefits for organizational-wide, not just public safety, for everyone. It is a retention tool. For example, in police, we have between 10 and 14 vacancies that we can't fill yet. We're looking to fill them. This would help that. And then it also will help retain employees who are maybe thinking of retiring or leaving to another organization because of salary. If #1 reason for your employment is health care, this would help retain employees. So I think it's worthy of researching. And then maybe someone may have the question, so you can address it. What would the need be for a consultant? What would that consultant be charged with?
Mayor, Councilmember Aldama, that consultant, we would send our employee census to the consultant and our existing coverages that we have, and then they would extrapolate that over 5, 10, 15 years in terms of cost, and then what types of tiered plans based on what Mesa has that we could offer those employees, those retirees, and what the cost would be.
Thank you. And then just to leave with the council, there are other West Valley cities who are seeking knowledge into this type of policy that Mesa adopted, and I believe Goodyear is one of them. Is that correct? That's
Mayor.
looking into this?
Mayor, Councilmember Aldama, I have not talked to the Goodyear director. I'm going to speak with him next week on some other items, but I'm sure this one would come up. But it's my understanding that they are looking at it. I don't know how far along they are.
Okay. Yeah, I would ask for consensus to look into this and see where we end up, see if it's affordable, see if it's what employees want, and if it's a good retention tool for employees for the organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. That was my question too, Councilor Aldama, was what do we need a consultant for? But it's basically like an actuarial who's going to actually be able to run an analysis and then look at different scenarios. So that does make sense. I mean, I think this is absolutely something we should be taking a look at. It's difficult to recruit, it's difficult to retain, and this is such a competitive job market. We've really got to keep up with what other cities, what benefits other cities are offering in order to retain our workforce. There's a cost to losing people and replacing them with new people. So I support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I too support exploring this issue. I'm not sure that the Mesa model may be the model we even want to go with. I would certainly like to broaden this a little bit, and perhaps you could contact the National League of Cities and Towns to find out what they know about this issue and if they are aware of any other cities across the country that are beefing up their retiree health benefit plans. So I don't want to just say, well, Mesa model's out there, let's consider following that or not. I'm sure that there are a lot of bright minds out there that are all working on this issue, and I would just like to broaden the scope a little bit by contacting the National League. Thank you.
Good. I know where he wants to.
Mr. Brown, when I came on council 8+ years ago, I believe we offered health benefits to our retirees at that time. And then 7, 8 years ago, 6 maybe, we studied this and decided to not offer that benefit. And I felt that, you know, the idea was that our retirees wouldn't be any worse off because we weren't offering the benefit, that they would just be getting their coverage some other fashion. So is what we're considering going to significantly different than what we used to do?
Mayor and Councilmember Turner, we did have a retiree health plan. It's been about a decade since we've had that in place, and it's difficult for me to juxtapose that with Mesa's current plan to see if it was the same or different. We'd really need to dig into other plans that are out there before I could comment on whether it's the same as what Mesa's doing. But we did have a retiree health care plan, to your point, and we did discontinue that when we ran into the recession in that period of time.
Mr. Phelps, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, Mayor, members of council. So when I got here, yes, the major difference is that the retiree health plan the city had, the employee picked up the vast majority of that cost. In fact, they picked up all of the cost, if I recall. And this is different. What Mesa is saying is that once you reach retirement age, up until age 65, the organization pays 100% of your medical premium. I believe that's what their plan is. So there is fundamentally difference. We had concerns with the program only because the retirees have a very high utilization rate just because aging, we use the healthcare system more. But again, this is what the consultant would do, would be able to come back and provide different analysis on what the impact of the organization would be.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Phelps. Mr. Brown. Well, you know, $45,000 to $50,000 is still $45,000 to $50,000, but if we can also in this look-see at things, if we can come up with some real analysis as to whether it will affect employee attraction and employee retention, then I guess I can support spending the money. That's particularly my interest, is that we have actual data that shows it will happen versus anecdotal experience. and of course, the cost of it. But I know we went down this road one time before and chose the path we're on now. So I'm a little bit skeptical, but let's see what happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I believe it's prudent for us to, right now, go ahead and evaluate this, spend the funding to see if it's something that the council wants to move forward on. So I would support moving forward on this project this time.
Okay, we're going to go 2 more, and then I'm going to take a consensus. It sounds like we already have consensus, but go
Yeah,
ahead.
thank you, Mayor. And I thought Councilmember Clark made a very good point, is that I don't think we should just seek to reproduce Mesa's plan, and I did just kind of look around on NLC's website. There's a lot of information there. I think we should look, broaden our scope and look and see what best suits the city of Glendale and our retirees. So I just wanted to say that I agree with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Brown, Chief Briggs, and Rick St. John and I all met on this item, and we had a really long conversation. We talked a lot about the things that were brought up today, and our staff is really knowledgeable in this area. And we thought if we can get it across today, then all of that information can come back. And yes, I agree. Our conversations did work around maybe Mesa's is not what we need. We just need something similar to theirs, but we have an opportunity to craft it. I hear there are some hiccups with City of Mesa's policy, so we're going to be able to learn from that and build on that. So I think this is a great opportunity to research it. So thank you.
Okay, so I guess my question is, do we have a consensus for them to open it up to seek more information no matter what source?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, there you go.
Thank you.
Very good. Item 3.
Council item of special interest, city's response to sober living homes.
Mayor, members of the council, here to provide staff report is Deputy City Manager Rick St. John.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. I'm here today to talk about the city's response to unlicensed sober living homes in response to Councilmember Tomalchoff's council item of special interest. There is a lot of information, a lot of discussion going around right now on sober living homes and what cities or what the state, what federal should be doing as far as how these homes are operating. They're unlicensed for the most part. And because they're unlicensed, they're not afforded the same protections that during some initial discussions that I've had, we thought they might be afforded. So that's kind of the central theme of today's conversation is what protections do they have and what protections are they not afforded because they're unlicensed. So kind of keep that in mind as we're walking through this. So over the past several years, as you know, we've seen an influx of sober living homes into our residential communities. It's not just the city of Glendale, it's all over the valley. And so that's piqued a lot of interest from the state, from the federal government, and from local municipalities on what we can do. It is being investigated at a state level for sure through the State Attorney General's office. I know some of our state legislators have gotten involved. They're having discussions with members of local government to find out exactly how big is this problem and what can the state do. And then at a municipal level, we are having conversations in the West Valley. I don't know about East Valley or Central Phoenix, but in the West Valley, we are having conversations so that what Glendale is doing with sober living homes is at least somewhat equal to what our other West Valley cities are doing. So, and then making sure that we're communicating about what homes are moving in, so we don't close a home and they just move across the street into another jurisdiction, but are faced with the same issues. So a lot of what we'll talk about as our response is being mirrored in some of our West Valley cities. We have to comply with our regulations. They have to comply with federal law, so the Americans with Disability Act and then the Fair Housing Act. We have to comply with those things. And the Arizona revised statute does provide some protections. These protections I've listed on a couple of slides, but keep in mind again, these protections only apply to those, bless you, to those homes that are properly licensed. And that, again, that is the central theme here. So ARS 36582 does say that 6 or fewer unrelated persons living in a home shall be considered a family for the purpose of any local law or ordinance. They're specifically talking about the zoning ordinance when they're saying that. That they cannot differ in any way from how a city treats any other family or residential property being occupied by a quote-unquote family. So that's a pretty heavy restriction if it is a licensed home. No residential facility should be established within, and the state says 1,200-foot radius of an existing facility. Here in the city of Glendale, we have a 1,320-foot radius rule. We are talking with the zoning ordinance consultants through this rewrite to see if we want to change that to 1,200 square feet to mirror state law. That conversation will come back to this council as probably a recommendation from the consultant, but ultimately it'll be your decision. If we keep the 1,320 or move to 1,200, then the city we can enforce our fire code and building safety code standards the same way that we would on any other residential property. And these protections only apply, again, to state licensed homes. And I will say the address of state licensed homes through Arizona Department of Health Services is protected. However, the name of the person or entity running the sober living home and some other information about that sober living home is available through Arizona Department of Health Services website. I have looked at the city of Glendale, and it's by zip code. I think there are 6 or 7 that have a Glendale zip code that are licensed through the state. At least half of those, doing a little bit of internet research, I believe are in the city of Phoenix, but have a Glendale mailing address. And I believe one is actually in the city of Peoria, but is being attributed to us on that spreadsheet. We have 2 or 3 in the city of Glendale that are properly licensed and operating, and they're from well-known businesses and entities that you would recognize. So our plan to address these unlicensed sober living homes, first, we require that a sober living home let us know that they want to establish within one of our residential communities. They have to come in and fill out an application. It's a reservation application to determine first and foremost, can you locate at this particular address that you're looking at, or are you within that 1,320-foot radius of an existing home? If you're within that 1,320-foot radius, we deny the application up front. And there is and we maintain records of all the reservations that are made. There's a payment that is made once you make the reservation for us to do the research, nominal fee of $112 and some change. And then if we find or determine that you can't be at that location because of another home that already exists, then we send a denial letter, and that typically closes that application. If they are allowed to operate at that location, they're not in violation of that 1,320-foot radius rule, then we tell them, you have got to get a proper state license to operate your facility. Before we go any further, you need to demonstrate that you're getting a state license. Now, they can do state licensing and their city business related to operating in our community. They can do those simultaneously. It's not like we're going to tell them, you can't install sprinklers in the home, you can't do other modifications to the home to bring it into compliance with our fire code or our building safety code. What we're telling them is we're not going to give you a certificate of occupancy until you demonstrate that you have a proper state license. And we're not defining what state license they need to have. They need to contact the Arizona Department of Health Services, provide a narrative of what their program is and what they plan to do out of that home, and let the state define whether they're behavioral health, assisted living, sober living, just developmentally disabled, whatever it may be. The state needs to determine what type of license they need to have, and then they need to inform us that they're in the process of getting a developmentally disabled license, sober living license, whatever it may be. And then we walk them through our internal process of helping them meet our building and fire safety codes so they can get a certificate of occupancy. If they do all those things and they're allowed to, they're licensed by the state, We're ready to give them a certificate of occupancy. We are now adding an additional step of requiring a city business license. And under our zoning ordinance, that is treating these properties exactly the same as we would treat any other residential property. So anybody that wants to operate a business out of a residential home is required to have a residential home-based business license.
Hold up there, she had a question.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to this, the second bullet point, state license to operate, because this is what we're running into multiple times, at least with residents that are reaching out to me, is that they don't have a license, state license. Code has already door knocked and determined that they don't have a state license, so they don't have a license with the city. So all of the other things that you just talked about that they're not protected by, but yet they continue to operate.
So on Mayor, Councilmember Tomachoff, on the next slide, I'm going to talk about
Okay.
how we're going to address that. If I can just talk about the business license and then jump to that slide.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So they're required to get a city business license. Class 1 license would be for a business that does not have an employee coming to the home to conduct the business and does not have services coming to the home for the occupants of the home. Class 2 business license, and Class 1 business license is pretty simple to get. Fill out an application, we approve it, and you have your license. Class 2 business license has a conditional use permitting process attached to it. And so if you are operating a sober living home or an assisted living, developmentally disabled, I don't know, I can't imagine a mechanism where you could only need a Class 1. I believe that you would have to get, almost by the definition of, and these are state Arizona Department of Health Safety or Health Services rules about these homes and how they have to operate, you would have to get a Class 2 license to operate within our city under our current zoning ordinance. And again, that does have a conditional use permitting process assigned to it. So part of their, they come in, they get the reservation, we tell them that they can be at that location because of the 1320, they're not in violation. They're getting their state license. They're working on their Class 2. They would have to submit to us in any conditional use permitting process, and not just specific to these types of homes, they'd have to submit to us a narrative, and the narrative has to be plainly understood. So working in the planning department, you may understand when somebody speaks a certain way about how a business operates, but it needs to be plainly understood by members of our community. So anybody reading it would understand exactly what's going to occur in that home. That narrative needs to be very plain, very simple to understand about what's going to occur. They also need to submit it's called a plan. It's basically a plan to inform the community, to inform the public. A public participation plan is what they call it. So they need to tell us, this is how we're going to inform the community. This is the radius that we'll send mailers to, or this is how we're going to get the message out. And there needs to be some type of public meeting so people can voice concerns or support for the existence of that home-based business under that conditional use permit. All that information gets provided to the Planning Commission, who then makes a final decision on whether to issue the conditional use permit. If the conditional use permit is denied or accepted and someone wants to appeal, the appeal would come to this council. But that is part of the Class 2 home-based business licensing process for the city of Glendale. And we would require most, if not, again, I couldn't imagine a scenario where someone could operate a sober living or assisted living or development and not need a Class 2. So basically what I'm saying is we require all these to get a Class 2 home-based business license. So we do know, as Councilmember Tomachoff just pointed out, that we have homes that are operating within our community today that are not licensed. So our current process, we go out, we make initial contact with the manager of the home, we inform them that they're in violation of our ordinances by operating without the proper licensing. So we don't enforce the state licensing requirements. That's DHS, they have inspectors, they have people that do that. We enforce our own internal licensing. And so we would inform them of what our policies or our ordinances state and what they need to do to be in compliance. And then we issue a notice of violation. So that first notice of violation is given upon our first contact and identifying that it is a group home, sober living home, operating without proper licensing. And we give them 7 days. We go back out after 7 days, and if they're still operating without licensing, then we issue a second notice of violation. We give them another 7 days, and if they're still operating after the second 7 days, we issue the civil citation. That goes through the civil citation process. If we get a finding by a hearing officer that they are responsible for those violations, but they refuse to close, then we would move to criminal, as we do with most of our other civil violations that then go criminal once we get that hearing officer to agree with us. And that process can take a very long time. The reason why we give, and Mr. Bowling, your code official, and I have discussed this on a couple of different occasions, the reason why we give the 14 days before issuing a citation is just understanding that there are real people living in these homes. And those real people need to be relocated so that the home can shut down, move those people to a licensed home, wherever that might be, while they go through the process of getting themselves licensed. And so we feel like 14 days is a reasonable amount of time to give someone to make that happen. But if they don't make that happen, after the 14 days, we do issue the citation.
Mayor?
Good.
Thank you. Mr. St. John, thank you. You said that they would get a 7-day notice of violation, and if they hadn't complied, they'd get another one, which is then explained why. I appreciate that. You said that then if they still weren't in compliance, you'd issue the civil citation, and if you got a ruling from the hearing officer that they were responsible, that they would have to close. But could they not come in compliance between day 14 and whenever the hearing officer issued a ruling and be able to stay open at that point?
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Turner, I did some research on how long it takes to get licensed through the state. And again, this is just experience from the city of Glendale. It's not experience countywide per se. We had one home who applied for their license, and they're not sober living, they're assisted living. They applied for a DHS license on January 27th of 2022 and were awarded their license on April 18th of 2023. So, and then with the Attorney General's and the state's response to what we're seeing today with fraud and Access is shutting down of funds to, I think they have about 100 different entities that they're not going to fund until they work through this. I can't imagine a scenario where somebody would be able to get licensed within just a couple of months, which is pretty typical for getting in front of a hearing officer on a civil case.
All right,
But to
thank
your
you.
point, if they were able to do that, then we would have to make an adjustment.
I didn't understand that there was a 1.5-year waiting period or application delay for getting these types of licenses. So now I can see why it may be very necessary that they close down, and that, you know, the advice to anybody opening up a home like this is get your paperwork done ahead of time, because it could be, detrimental to the residents you supposedly are hoping to serve, but it also could be very financially detrimental to the operator if they've, signed a year lease or multi-year lease and have no way out of it. So, thank you.
Any further questions? I believe this is an informational item only.
I've got just a couple of, Vice Mayor, just a couple of slides to wrap up, if I may.
Oh, I'm sorry, I jumped the gun.
So again, just for public consumption, the federal, state, and county are active in this. The FBI is investigating. They put out a release in January of this year related to sober living homes, housing Native Americans, and fraud schemes occurring at a federal level. So they are investigating at least a couple of houses in the city of Glendale currently, and I know they're actively investigating cases all over the valley. The State Attorney General is investigating fraud schemes. Arizona Department of Health Services has suspended licensing. Access has suspended funding. Discussions with state legislators, and the county attorney has had some conversations about what their involvement might look like. Finally, the state established 211 hotline, knowing that the closing of these homes is going to displace people. someone displaced because a sober living home was closed can call 211 for resources to help them get placed in a licensed home. And with that, I'm happy to answer any additional questions.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple things. I wanted to back up to the conditional use permit and the reason, because we've had quite a bit of discussion, and I know we participated together along with Councilmember Melner and the West Valley group meeting monthly on this issue. But the reason that we are able to require a Class 2 business license and then a conditional use permit is because any service being provided on the site, including 24-hour supervision, or anybody coming to the site for any services, including drug testing, parole, meetings, anything like that, makes it require a Class 2 business and therefore a conditional use permit.
Mayor,
Is that
Councilmember
correct?
Tomachef, that is correct, yes.
Okay. My other question is, I know there's a lot of, if it's less than 5 people or less than 6 people, 6 or 5 or fewer, I guess, it's to be treated according to state law, and we can address that later when we get ready for our next legislative session, but it needs to be treated just like any other residential home according to state law. I'm going to get to how we're handling it as far as being proactive, but as your code officers, which I think are the ones that are leading this, are knocking on doors, how are they, are you determining the number of people by the number of people on the premises? Are they going to go in and count the beds? How are they, because it would be really difficult, I know that there's some of them that I'm familiar with, they pick people up in a van, they take them to various places during the day, they're not always on the site. So how are we determining what type of threshold of people that are at that property?
So Mayor, Councilmember Tomachef, again, this is a very sticky issue, and so I like to keep things as simple as we can keep it. When you apply for a license through Arizona Department of Health Services, you have to identify your occupancy. So you have to tell DHS, I'm a 1 to 6 or I'm a 6 to 10 occupancy. They license you as a 1 to 6 or a 6 to 10, and they come out and inspect. So that's why I don't think that we should be in the business of telling a residential facility of whatever kind that they need to prove to us that they're a 1 to 5 or a 6 to 10. Because if they're licensed by the state to be a 1 to 5, then when we go in to do our fire code building safety inspections, we can verify that that's how they're set up. And if there's a clear, if they're telling us they're 1 to 5, but they have 7 bedrooms, and that each bedroom is set up to occupy at least 2 people, we can go back to DHS and say, we believe they've gotten an improper license, and they need to get the license to be a heavier use.
Okay. Mayor, if I could continue. But we require, if there's 6 or more people on the premises, we, as far as our fire code and the fire inspections, which would be annual, require the premises to be sprinklered. So I could see there'd be some, I'm not saying everyone, but I could see there would be some incentive for them, because it's expensive to install sprinklers in a residential home. I could see there's definitely an incentive to at least appear that they're below that threshold.
Mayor, Councilmember Tomachef, your adopted fire code mandates sprinkler systems for any occupancy load. If there are 2 people living in the home that are not related, that are not under a landlord-tenant agreement of natural sorts, if they are living in an assisted living, sober living, then we would require sprinklers in that home, whether they're 1 to 5 or 6 to 10.
Okay, that's
Now,
changed since our previous conversation.
Well, Councilmember Tomachef, the state amended their adopted fire code to allow for 1 to 5s to operate without sprinkler systems. So what we tell a 1 to 5 is if they can get a variance from the state, then we will accept that variance from the state, but the state needs to do that inspection. And they need to provide evidence to us that they've done the inspection, they provided the variance, and that it is a 1 to 5. And then we would accept that. On the fire code side, on the building safety code side, I'm sorry, not even on the fire code side, on the sprinkler side. So there are other provisions of the fire code and other rules within the state law regarding sober living homes. You have to post egress patterns, for example, so that if there were a fire to occur in the home, someone standing in a hallway would know where the closest exit is. There are other things like that that they would still have to adhere to. The sprinkler system requirement is the only thing they can get a variance from through the state.
And the variance would only be available if there's 5 or fewer occupants, so there's no variance available for more than that.
Mayor, Councilmember Talmachoff, correct.
Okay, Mayor, I have a couple other questions. So, I mean, it's a complicated issue because these are already existing in our neighborhoods. They're out there, residents are aware, some residents. Of the unlicensed one, I think people are having, seems to be a more easy time identifying them. But how are we going to be proactive in engaging on this? And I know Surprise has 4 dedicated staff members to, and they're substantially smaller city than we are. They've dedicated for, I think, a couple of code officers, a police officer, and then somebody else to working this issue. How are we going to be proactive, and what resources are we going to need to address this?
Mayor, Councilmember Talmachoff, right now Code Compliance has a plan to touch every residential property every 4 months. We originally started with a plan to do an inspection at every residential property every 3 months. There are more residential parcels than we originally thought, and so we've now moved it to once every 4 months. Our inspectors are aware of this issue. We've had a lot of conversations with our inspectors about what they should be looking for when they're doing inspections. So we'll be out in the communities actively looking for signs of an active sober living or assisted living or, whatever it may be, type of group home operating within a community. When they find those homes, we have a database of approved homes and people that are operating licensed and properly. And those receive annual inspections from the fire department. So we have that list. We compare against that list. And if they're not properly licensed, we would go back out and issue a notice of violation.
Okay. I know I've talked to, there's a couple of electeds that are also public safety sworn people, and we've had conversations about that a lot of our public safety personnel know where these places are, and that I think that there was some discussion about adding a category or somewhere for them to, I know fire uses iPads or some sort of tablet, but some way for them to identify, because they may run a call about, possible overdose or whatever reason, but they do run to these places, I think, pretty frequently. Is there some way, are we working on some way for them to identify the location where this was and put it into our database going forward? And then also, what should residents do people have asked me, are we supposed to fill out a Glendale 1? What do we do about thinking that there's an unlicensed sober living home next door to me, across the street from me? There's 3 of them clustered, within 4 or 5 houses of each other, because I know there's a lot of groups going in and buying a lot of houses close together to do this. So 2 things, what are we making something easy for public safety to report these, and what should residents do?
Mayor, Councilmember Talmachoff, on the first question, I spoke with Chief Freeberg last week about electronic charting and whether that information could be shared amongst other partners in the automatic aid system. Currently there's not a standard platform for electronic charting. So Glendale uses a different platform than Phoenix, let's say, and then Surprise is even different from the 2 of us. There is one company, though, that does electronic charting that has kind of risen to the top, and so it kind of feels like everybody's moving to that platform. If that does happen, that's an easy mechanism for communication. The other mechanism for communication is through the Phoenix Alarm Room. So once we identify a home, if it's properly licensed. If it's not properly licensed, I wouldn't recommend tagging it because we need to go out and do the inspections and get them into a different kind of process. I understand the benefit of letting people know that it's there, but that benefit doesn't occur if all they do is tell the Phoenix Alarm Room and it doesn't go anywhere from
Oh,
there.
no, I'm talking about internally, for them to tag it for our public safety. If it is, I guess it would have to be because of automatic aid, but at least internally, is there a way for them to, I mean, how do you know that code should go knock on this door?
Mayor, Councilmember Tomachov, if I'm understanding the question, if fire department responds to a sober living home or the police department responds to a sober living home that's not on my radar for code, how does that information get exchanged? That's the conversation that I've had with both Chief Briggs and Chief
Okay.
Freeberg, is that we need that information. This is a serious issue. Should you run across a home that you suspect is operating without a license, you need to let us know so we can go out and start our process. I've also got a list of, I don't know, I'm going to say 50 homes that have applied for, that have gotten the reservation and started the application process with the city of Glendale over the last 3 years. We do need to go to those homes and ensure that they're not operating a sober living. So if you come to the city of Glendale and fill out the reservation, you ask for a couple of extensions, let's say, because you weren't able to get it done in the initial 60-day time period that we give. And again, it took 15 months for one company to get licensed. So we do issue up to 9 extensions, and they're 90-day extensions. You get original 60 days and then 90-day extensions. You go through about half of that, you're on your 5th extension, you just get tired, and you send the city of Glendale a letter saying, never mind. Well, then we drop it, but no one ever goes out and takes a look to see if you really did stop doing what you said you wanted to do. So that's another piece of what we need to do. We need to take that list of properties that have applied and told us that's what they want to do and make sure that they're not doing it outside of our knowledge. So that's another piece of how we're going to try to address and not simply rely on the community to tell us there's something operating across the street or next door.
And then, okay, and then back to what should a resident do is the ideal thing, and I've told them, if you don't want to fill out a Glendale one, send me an email, give me the address. I've sent multiple addresses to you, but what should residents do?
So Mayor, Councilmember Tomachov, they can call 930-3620, which is our code compliance main line. That's answered Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, normal business hours. And then if you leave a message over the weekend, of course, on Monday, we'll get back to you. And we'll fill out the Glendale one and open a case for you if you would prefer to just leave a voicemail or talk to somebody.
Okay, and then one last thing, Mayor, if I could. This is in no way to disparage or say that we aren't going to allow sober living homes in Glendale. Sober living homes are an important part of the recovery process for somebody trying to recover and get their life back on track. So what we're talking about is unlicensed sober living homes, and many of these are victimizing people who are seeking help in recovery. So I just want to make sure that we are clear about that, is that we are not talking about properly licensed, properly run sober living homes. Thank you.
Mr. Milner.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. St. John, I just want to get a clarification on the ARS 36582. So if a unlicensed sober living home has 6 or fewer unrelated people in their home today, does this say that we cannot do anything about it?
Mayor, Councilmember Malnar, no. What 582 says specifically is these protections only apply to properly licensed homes. So if they are operating, housing 5 people without a state license, these protections do not apply to them.
Okay, so if they've got no license and there are 6 or fewer, then there's no regulation that we can put into it.
Mayor, Councilmember Malnar, I'm not sure I understood that.
In other words, it says in 36582, let's say they are licensed.
Mm-hmm.
Does that say that then we as a city cannot touch them? We can't require a business license? You addressed that, but I wanted to make sure I understood it.
Mayor, Councilmember Malnar, no, it does not state that. So what it says is you have to treat it as any other residential property. And we would require a home-based business license for any other residential property that was operating as a business.
Okay. All right. That answers that question. And I think that even that language in the law we may want to consider I know there's some legislators that would be consider changing that to make it more clear. Thank you.
Mayor, Councilmember Melnar, if I may just make one brief comment on that. 36582 applies to developmentally disabled homes, and the state law does not do, it's not very clear in state law what qualifies as a developmentally disabled home. And so there's been a lot of discussion about whether or not sober living would qualify as developmentally disabled. I don't think that's even up for discussion because they're defined separately within state law. And the definition of a sober living home is very clear in state law. So I don't know why there would be any confusion there, but that has been a topic of conversation.
All right, any other questions?
Yes, Mayor?
I have one more.
Thank you. What prevents them from operating unlicensed and just renting rooms to individuals in essence, as opposed to, is it the financing they get for being a sober living facility that's the incentive for them?
Mayor, Councilmember Turner, you hit the nail on the head. It is the financing. And so if I own a home and I want to run it as a sober living home, but I want to run it in a non-traditional way, I don't care about access funding through the state. I'm going to charge the individual a rent for living in that home, and I'll provide a sober environment. That's more of a traditional landlord-tenant agreement. I'm paying my landlord to occupy space within this home. To get the access funding through the state, they have to be licensed. And to be licensed through the state, you would also need certain licensing in the city of Glendale.
Okay. And then as far as the other way of doing it without being licensed and without having the access money, is there any restrictions or prohibitions on that in Glendale? Just an individual or a nonprofit or something that would rent, that might own a house or lease a house and then rent it by, room by room? Do we?
Mayor, Councilmember Turner, I would have to go back and look more specifically at our zoning ordinance and how it applies to rental properties. Mr. Bailey, if you have any recollection, I believe there are provisions that talk about the number of unrelated persons living under the same roof residential home, and some fire code stipulations that come into play.
Okay.
That's the adopted fire code, though, and then there's adopted building safety code that would apply. Whether there's something in our ordinance, I can't recall.
And that's not on today's agenda, so we can talk on our own about that. Thank you very much.
Mayor, one last thing. Mr. St. John, could you bring this back for an update, on a progress update to us, say in 90 days, to see what kind of progress we've made so we can determine that, maybe we might need more resources. I don't know, but I'd love to have an update if there's a consensus to have that in 90 days and come back and let us know how it's going.
Mayor, Councilmember Tomalchoff, would an email suffice with a written update?
Yeah, and then I guess if we think we need to actually notice it and put it on the agenda, then we can do that. Perfect, thank you.
Okay, you good?
Yes, sir.
Okay, item 4.
Council committees. Mayor and council, it's that time of year. Per your guidelines, you need to make appointments to your council committees, which is the Government Services Committee. Your guidelines also specify that council members may only serve for 2 consecutive years. Our current members on the GSC are council members Turner, Hugh, and Tomachoff. Council members Turner and Hugh have already served 3 years, and council member Tomachoff has served 2. So we do need 3 new members.
Business?
Mayor,
Yes.
I'll be willing to serve on the committee.
Mayor, I'd be willing to serve.
Okay, do you have to be actually have to be a council member?
Yes.
Which committee?
No, but
Okay. Okay, and then you?
Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
No.
he's already served 3 consecutive years.
Oh, I'll do it. All right.
Council.
Not a lot of options here.
Thank you.
Somebody's looking at you.
Yeah, I'll do it. I'm in. Put me on.
Okay.
Okay, you don't need a discussion or consensus or anything, you got what you need.
I've got what I need, yes, sir.
Okay, item number 5.
Downtown Campus Reinvestment Project Update.
Mayor, members of the council, here today to provide an update on our downtown reinvestment project. It'll be led by Eddie Garcia, our principal architect, and presented also by Diane Jacobs from Holly Street and assisted by Mike Jacobs. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Thank you, Mr. Phelps. We are at a key decision point today, and the team is prepared to walk you through our progress. And just a quick recap before I go through the agenda items. This presentation is based on about a 30% plus completion of our design process. Last time we saw you together as a group to talk more robustly about where we are in the design process was in January. And since then, we've had some community meetings. We've had an update on our community process. And then in the month of May, the design team, along with Oakland Construction, we're working on aligning our pricing models with the current design package that we're going to talk about today. So again, we're at 30% plus in the completion of the design process. This is a key decision point that we have in moving forward, because we're going to move into what we call design development here shortly. But as we run through today's agenda, there's several chapters here that we'd like to run through, and it's a desire of the team to run through each chapter completely. We can pause at those moments to take on questions if you like, but definitely when we get to the design and budget approach, we will walk you through the steps of where we are by each of the scoping items of the project, and we will pause at how they're aligning with our current tracking of the budget, and then we can answer any questions there. And then lastly, we'll cover next steps. So without further ado, I would like to pass this over to Design Jacobs, principal with Holly Street Studio, and we'll begin the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia, Mayor and members of the council. It's my pleasure to give you an update of the DCRP project post-schematic design phase, which is about 30% of the process. Essentially, what I'm going to share with you is an update of the design, and my colleagues will go into issues regarding budget moving forward. As you know, the City of Glendale put forth some very high expectations for this project, and we continue to put high expectations on the team's efforts down to the last detail. What I'm going to share with you today are 3 essential foundations of the design as we progress. One is the floor plan and how we're organizing the existing building to become something that's new and functional, a great place to work. 2 is going to be the reorganization of campus space, more specifically on the municipal core. And the third thing is calibrating sort of the architectural expression of the building as we continue with the design process. As you can see on your slide, the 9 foundations of healthy buildings are things that we're taking very seriously as we design this project. It moves beyond kind of the issues of aesthetics and appearance into creating a space that's healthy, focused on the well-being of not only the people working here, but the people that will be using the building from the public at large. Regardless of where you live, we are setting this up for a great city center for people all over Glendale and beyond. Essentially, what we're given as a starting point for your project is a very straightforward floor plan. It's an interesting geometry. The floor plan that you see above is less of a plan and more of a diagram. To the left of the slide is you're looking toward City Council chambers, where we are today. To the right of the slide, you're looking at Glendale Avenue. Essentially, it's arranged horizontally for ease of description. The way we're designing this building is to take advantage of existing structural systems and openings in the slab, and we're trying to keep it very open and fluid and flexible so that as work changes and society changes and the way offices will change, they can be adapted moving forward. The building is designed for workspace kind of in the center, more programmatic functions, and more open gathering spaces in those kind of different shapes, sort of triangle zones on the end, with core elements in the middle that go all the way up through the building to make sure that the plan is efficient. Essentially on floors 2, 3, and 4, we're going to house the offices that do the business every day of the city of Glendale, essentially organizing it in such a way that private offices and conference rooms are in the darker yellow spaces, and that open offices have access to fresh air, to light, to flexibility, giving each department a sense of identity, a sense of connection, and a really great place to work. We feel that as we progress the floor plan, and we're doing that as I share this, that this organization will help make the building be a lot more efficient and better place to work, as I mentioned. Next slide. There's also a line of security, of which you can see with the red thin line up to the top of the slide plan north, so that when folks come to do business with the city of Glendale, they have to be badged in. It can be very open and welcoming, but very secure at the same time. You can see the two sort of white rectangle squares within the plan diagram represent stairs for emergency exits, but we intend to create open stairs that are safe during emergencies, but also open, and encourage people to use them on a daily basis rather than always having to go to the elevator. We're adding an elevator for code reasons. It will be on the opposite side of the floor plate, so you have great coverage for going up and down from department to department, and of course down to the ground level. On those triangle zones that you saw on the plan diagram, you'll see that on the north zone, we're calling it a flex area that will have conference space, little sort of kitchenettes, a stair that takes you right down to the lobby or up above to the upper levels, and the restrooms. These are very early diagrams that I'm sharing with you today for ease of communication, but right now our team is progressing these ideas, moving them forward, and their floor plans as I speak. The next side is the South Flex area, which is dedicated to employees. These flex areas can be seating areas, areas for breaking bread, coming together for special occasions, or everyday work zones. We're creating these zones on levels 2, levels 3, and 4. There's some similarities in the public levels, which we'll share with you next time. But the idea is that you always know where you are, that there's this sense that you have a place to sort of pick up, have a private conversation with enclaves and other lounge spaces, but also be able to get together and have a meal together. We understand that 1 or 2 departments are kind of crock pot experts, so this is their spot. Next one. So the second component of the design as we progress it, we're calling here on this slide the amphitheater, but it's really the organizational design for the heart of the municipal campus. When we first started working with the city, we looked at different kind of levels of interpretation or exploration for what this amphitheater might be. It could be something really small, a stool and a bench with a microphone, all the way up to, a major infrastructure for huge bands to come and hang their devices. The truth is always somewhere in the middle, and what we've created is something that can give you technology plug and play for community groups, for even regional acts, but do not require any major movement or major investment for this to happen. The amphitheater that you may have seen in earlier schemes shows the shade device kind of covering everywhere. What we're trying to do here is create a device that works with the patterns of the sun and allows for some fresh air and light and solar orientation of the green open spaces, but at the same time shades the stage area. The slide that you see here today is a conceptual slide to help us identify what the heights need to be and what the sizes need to be for this particular structure. And you can see the City Hall and the City Council buildings in early explorations of massing and apertures with solid and glass. And you can see that there will be a variety of seating areas, that the technology would be interlaced within the structures, and also that the seating is a lot more gradual and easy to kind of navigate. There will be ADA accessible areas throughout, not just below, not just above, and it will feel a little bit more like the park is sort of entering the City Hall, City Council campus, rather than sort of a line in between. So again, this is just showing the west side. Murphy Park is underway as well, but today we're going to focus on these major elements. So the canopy that you see here is what's called a turnkey amphitheater. It will have integrated technology that will be waterproof to a certain extent. You're looking at sort of a concept here in terms of massing and footprint, but essentially all the things that you need to have a concert will be within the space and will be controllable by remote access areas as well as on-site. This shows the view from the stage looking toward the library and the park. And what's interesting here is that this particular slide shows the sun at right about evening time, where you'd have a show at the height of summer. I believe it's taken July 21st. And what we're trying to do is calibrate this canopy so that you have just enough shade in the seating area, the performance space, and parts of the park where patrons will come and enjoy a concert and still have the cool air and breezes to sort of experience. Essentially, what we're doing is taking away kind of the larger footprint and that walled entry that was studied earlier in favor of something that's calibrated just enough to give you exactly what you need in terms of comfort, in terms of iconography. It doesn't take over the entire sort of visual presentation of the space, and in terms of being able to enjoy it on any given day, whether there's a show or not. So the third component of the design that we're moving forward as the project moves forward is the facade. This really is a discussion about art and how the building looks and how it presents its identity. But ahead of that, while we're working on these things, we're also considering the science. Living in Arizona with the sun as powerful as it is, and the challenges with fresh air that we have in a lot of our older buildings, we're looking at the facade in terms of how it behaves and how the building performs, as well as how it's going to look. So the priorities for your new City Hall are to make sure that you have as many spaces daylit as possible. We want to make sure that we cut down on heat gain and on the cost of lighting the space. There's technology available for this. There's free light from the sun most every day in Arizona. Views in, we want to make sure that people that visit the park in your city can see what's going on in service to the citizens of Glendale. Views out, a pleasant place to work and see whether it's raining, and something very, very different from the existing City Hall building right now. Ventilation, taking care of noise, which is a big problem in your building with the train, heat gain, and of course, this building as a City Hall should have a civic presence. So the sketch sort of delineates one of the priorities for this building, and that is that the first floor is open and accessible, well-lit, and sort of integrated with the park in a way that is welcoming and easy to find and easy to work in for visitors, citizens, and employees alike. But there's also a huge scientific sort of end of this and how we're studying the building, and each facade takes in the sun, the air, and the light in different ways. And what we're doing is taking these priorities of human scale and overlaying them with the very serious priorities of building performance and building skin. So there's many, many ways to do this, and I'm sharing with you today some of the things that we found in other cities. Glendale is very unique. We don't intend to make a building here that looks like another place, but there's so many different options with the building facade science as compared to what was done in 1984. So we're looking at a facade that has some movement, some fins, that really controls the light and lets views out at the same time. We also want to make sure that whatever we design and build at the City of Glendale is easy to maintain, has the ability to have their windows cleaned on a regular basis, and is a long-lasting building for generations to come. So different materials that we've been exploring, and that doesn't mean that we would recommend one material or another, but materials that we feel sort of work with the guidelines for this project. So metal, there's many things that we can see you can get from a metal facade, which is punctuated light, texture, different kinds of scale. We might use some metal at the lower levels or other places, but this is something that we think is a viable material for the project. Stone and cementitious panels are another way to get kind of a modularity of the building, allow landscape to kind of be in front, and use this as a way to create a wonderful backdrop for the light that we have in Arizona. Terracotta is a material that we most recently were able to employ at our building, which you're looking at here, that opened for ASU in the city of Mesa. Terracotta is like a clay material that serves as a rain screen, that is timeless and has the ability to weather and insulate in our climate, but also has a bunch of different textures and colors. We chose to go with kind of a creamy color. At sunset and sunrise, the color of the building really comes alive and doesn't define the space, but it sort of reflects what's beautiful about Arizona already. In this building, you can see there's areas that are very open and welcoming. In particular, this building had some darker, more technical spaces. It's a film school, but you can see that there's a lot of variety and that the ground level has to be open, welcoming, easy to find. In this case, we exposed the columns and we showed metal panels at the ground level. And brick is another material now that is sort of never goes out of style. There's really new ways to employ this wonderful material, and we have a lot of craftsmen and wonderful labor in Arizona that can do a contemporary, elegant, sophisticated design with this material that will last you a very long time. So as we're looking at these varieties of materials, we're studying the way the material will land on the face of the building, which is the next slide, or the next series of slides. So I'm going to pass this off to Michael Jacobs, principal of Holly Street, and he's going to begin to talk about what those other options are.
Mayor, Council, yes, want to continue to discuss the design, but then overlay budget on the portion. Can you hear me now? Mayor, council members, yes, want to continue the conversation on design and overlay the budget discussion. So the next slide, we're picking up where we left in January 24th, and at that point there was a base cost, project cost approved of 84.6. So we're going to show you where we're at with that base project and then some additional information after that. And just to reiterate or refresh, project cost includes construction cost and a bunch of other things. So there's professional fees, there's furniture, fixtures and equipment, there's audio visual and other miscellaneous fees. So we're talking about project cost, not just construction cost here. And you all have been by this many times, maybe today, but this is what we're starting with, and just to start the conversation there. We have a series of images that will show you before and after that we can walk through. So the next one, and again, there's the first one. You are floating above Velma Teague Library. You're looking towards the southwest. So you can see the new skin on council chambers. You can see the new bowl of the amphitheater with its canopy, a new skin and the redoing of the roof on City Hall, and then some additional work on the garage in the distance. Murphy Park, you can see kind of some of the pathways and things that we're exploring there. And this is all at 30% design documents at this point. The next view, you're kind of standing in the link, what we're calling it now. You're looking south towards City Hall, so you're kind of looking straight towards Glendale. You have the amphitheater and its slope to your left, and you have the garage to the right. And we're really trying to decongest this area, because when you're coming from the garage at the lower level into the complex, it's kind of, it's a bit dark and it's a bit of a maze. So we're really trying to clear that up. So you can see the bridge coming across, and like I mentioned, you can see the canyon here as well.
Let me, just to be clear on this large picture, that would almost be standing on the roof of this building looking that direction.
Yes, that's
Okay.
very, very close.
Okay.
Yeah. The next slide then shows you, you're kind of just leaving Velma Teague. You're kind of on the south side of Velma Teague. If there was a door there, you're looking towards the amphitheater. So just above the figure in orange, you can see the canopy of the amphitheater. And then one important thing to see is right past that canopy, you could see the entrance to the council chambers, and then down below, you can see the entrance to the green room. So a lot of that is much more visible at this time. And then on the left, you're seeing the elevation of City Hall that would look out over the park. And these elevations are preliminary. We're trying to get the massing down, the size, and we will come back with additional information on the exact details of that. But the goal is to have a clear base where it's as transparent as possible, where the public is encouraged to participate, 3 levels of your workhorse of City Hall, and then have an element on the roof that kind of celebrates the civic nature. Then here you're standing, and again, before and after, you have just walked out of the garage at the lower level of the garage, and you're looking in the new rendering, you can see Velma Teague Library in the distance there on top of the grass. So before and after, this one speaks to much better than any of the other ones, but we're really trying to make this an entrance that is open, is visible. It's about safety, it's about access, it's about clarity. So you have City Hall on the right, Council on the left, and you can see the windows for the new entrance there, and then a delicate bridge or a link connecting the two with the amphitheater canopy right behind that. We also have the opportunity to introduce landscape down here. So every move we make is to try to take the park setting of Murphy Park as far west as we can, all the way to 59th if that's possible. And the next slide, we don't have a before and after here, but if you back up real quick, sorry. Okay, just picture yourself walking forward about 50 to 60 feet in this image here, and then click. If you turn south, so you are at the lower level, there's still a basement level below you, but you are looking towards Glendale Avenue. So you can see the end of City Hall as it kind of fades away from you. You can see the link bridge on the left and the garage on the right. The 2-story vertical element there, what we want to explore is this idea that there is openings between the lower level and level 1, and that's the elevator bank there. So this is mostly considered to be staff entry and staff going back and forth between the 2 buildings. So in a way, this could be a staff courtyard here. Another piece that we have on the garage is we're doing additional work, or we're doing work on the north and south, and it relates to safety, it relates to visibility and access, and also the identity of the garage. So these are 2 new stairs that we have on the north and south. Right now, you are looking west, so you're looking towards 59th, but everybody from the garage is going to come out. Sorry. Everybody coming out of the garage, as soon as you start walking down these stairs, you're going to see and be directed straight for City Hall. I think there's another image later that we can show you. The next piece is, okay, so let's pause for a second because this is base project. It's what I've talked about and we've talked about for City Hall, the exterior of Council, amphitheater, some work on the garage, the stairs on the north and south, Murphy Park. The budget that was approved in January was 84.6, and it's our job, our responsibility to hit that, just for transparency, working with Oakland, Jesse here. With the contractors, we're currently tracking 86.9, and we will continue to work and make sure we hit that budget to 84.6. But we're just trying to show you exactly where we're at here. The next series of slides we want to talk about a few things in January that were alternates that were discussed. There wasn't consensus, but there was interest in looking at a couple different things and considering them. So again, when we talk about these numbers, at that point, we talked about a fifth level, ballpark of 5.7, interior work in the council at 2.5, additional work at garage, and the term we used then was completing the campus, like bringing the campus all the way out to 59th. And again, those are project costs, so those numbers up above include construction fees, FF&E, audiovisual, all that information. And then we have a series of images to walk you through on that. So everything is grayed out for what's in the base project, and the color, the stronger piece, is what we're talking about for an alternate. When we looked at the fifth floor, we wanted to present two different options to you. One is a terrace space, and the other is a fitted out space. So the terrace would be a little bit less. So this is about 4.7 million out of what we were talking about at 5.7 in the budget. The next image gives you a really good sense of what it would be like to be on the terrace level, looking north over Glendale. Murphy Park is kind of slightly off to your right. Open space, lots of opportunities to use this for many, many different things. You see the elevators and that one piece at the end there, so that would be the access coming up there. And just like I say, a flexible space that could have many, many different uses. Then back up here a second. Yes, you had it, Eddie. Sorry, that was me. This just gives you an idea of what that shade structure looks when you're looking at that fifth level. So again, you're roughly on the roof of this building looking towards Glendale. So then next what we did is look, what would it be to fit that space out and create an interior space that again would be very flexible. Would it be interior space with restrooms, with HVAC, lighting, the full bit. And that was right about what we thought. It's right about the 5.7. So again, the interior space, similar square footage as the terrace, but we have this, the wall, you still have a tiny bit of a terrace that you could step outside and look out over the park, have some ability to have some exterior there, but mostly it's a flexible interior space. There's been terms thrown around like a visibility center, community room, meeting room, lots of different things from economic development to your community members to use this space. So that was one of the options. The next one was, if we're doing work on council on the exterior, which is very disruptive, you won't be using it for the entire period of construction, what would it mean to take on the inside of council chambers? So this we're looking at, and we talked about a 2.5 back in January, and we're tracking right about that. Most of the work is in the inside, except on the image you can see addition that we're doing, which allows for a little bit larger executive session conference room, and we'll show you in a second here. So first image is diagram of the floor plan, like what would that include? So if you look at this space, we would not be changing the rake of the seats. We did look at that and it just didn't seem worth the money that you would have to spend to do that. And overall, the shape of this room is nice, it feels good, it just needs updating. So we're talking about new finishes, cabinetry, which would be this area here. The ceiling system would get redone because we'd have new information, new lighting, new MEPs. All that stuff would be new, but your shape would generally be about what you're seeing here right now. The chairs are in decent shape, so we'd look at reupholstering them. And then there's a new patio that is off on the east side here that can be used as part of the amphitheater. And then also the next slide shows you the executive work session. So here we're on Glen Avenue looking east. You could see City Hall to the right. You can see the rough idea of the new skin on council chambers. But what we do is we fill in this little triangle right behind you here. This becomes visible to the community. You also have the ability with drapes to close it off when you're in session, but it just has a nice balance of projecting what is going on in this building because it is very solid, but also doing something to that edge of the street. So you can have some trees and landscape there that make it a much nicer experience from the outside as well as the inside. Okay, so the last piece we're talking about is the garage, or the term I used before was completing the campus. And budgetary, we were looking 2.8, and we're tracking a little bit less than that at 2.7. And the image here, you can see there should be a lot of trees around this, but we'll show you that in a second. But basically, it's a skin on the east and west side. with opportunities of lots of different things there, and then taking the landscape around the garage. So I'm backing up here to show you base project. So the base project includes these new stairs, and you can kind of see the stair in yellow as it's going down. So if you picture yourself parking on the top floor, you come to that stair and you're directed straight to the front door of City Hall. So no longer are you going down this concrete stair that is dark and used for many more things besides actual circulation and its intention. So again, this stair is about access, visibility, and clarity. As you're driving down Glendale, you see the stair telling you where to go once you've parked. So this is in the base project. What we're talking about for the addition is the idea of taking the landscape. So we do work with the sidewalk, we do work with the landscape to bring the setting of Murphy Park all the way to 59th. And then the next image, I think, shows you a little bit more. So if you look, first of all, look on the left side of this image. So if you're going down 59th right now, you are on the street. You know, you have a street and you have a sidewalk and then kind of no man's land to the garage. We're flipping that. We're taking landscape to the street. We're treating it as kind of a downtown park-like setting. So if you are walking north-south, all of a sudden you have a much more pleasant experience in the shade and the protection of being removed from that close to the vehicles. You can also see on that side the skin that we would take and explore bringing out to cover that. The other thing this shows is this idea of either digital and or art at this corner. So this is an incredible opportunity because of how much traffic is here and the visibility. It starts to introduce people to the Civic campus. So it's just an idea of a digital board, and then, as I said before, 5 points for who recognized the artists, and we can go over that later. Okay, next image is, so you're now on 59th, you're looking at the entrance into the garage with the skin and with signage and with trees and lighting. All of a sudden we have a whole different feel of this part of the campus, and this part becomes the introduction to your City Hall from the west. I think, so one of the things that wasn't directly asked to consider, but has been coming up in conversation, so we just wanted to show some ideas. There is possibility to put solar on both roofs. They have great orientation, especially the garage has a lot of square footage there. City Hall roof also has some space there. And the benefit beyond electricity and those things is all of a sudden your top level of the parking is completely shaded. So lots of benefits to solar. If there's interest there, we can come back with facts and figures on that. We didn't have that ready for today. So 2 diagrams to show you the pieces. So there's the base project, which is down on the bottom, and then you can see floating above it is the different pieces for consideration. So from the left, you have a terrace at the 5th level or an interior space. You have PV on the garage, which again, that's not for today. You have the skin on the garage, and then you have the council chamber interior, and you can see the little triangle of the executive session room there floating. So I think that's our last slide in this part of the discussion. We do want to talk to you about next steps, but it's kind of a pause at this point.
Okay. When you say next steps?
Well, I think at this point, what we're looking for is information, questions, guidance on the options.
All right. Well, I guess I'll kick it off. I want to thank you guys. I know you put a lot of work into this. I think I've talked with you 2 or 3 times myself, and I think you've been making rounds with most of the members trying to find out what they're looking for, what they want to do. I think you've done a good job. Actually, I think you did a really good job. You know, the parking garage to me is really, it's a focal point from the direction that I come to work each day, entering from the west. And you know, from the downtown, you know, the needs, I think the facade is important. If you're going to be changing Murphy Park area, all of that, I think that we need to continue that out. I think that it'd be real important to do that. I did really like the one photo, one of the last ones that showed the electronic billboard on the side. And that was actually brought up years ago by a member of the Rotary Club that was, he wanted to do it a little bit different, but he was looking to put something like that up just to promote Glendale. He's since passed, and I just think that that's a great idea. For me, the renovation of inside of here, I don't know about everybody else, but I'm freezing to death. And every time I come in here, it's the only place in Arizona that the air conditioner works great is right here. Yeah. And we can't seem to turn it off. I think between that, between the electronics that we have, we're going with some technology up here that's old, not as old as me, but old. And I think that there's a great opportunity to fix a lot of that. Overall, is it a bad location? No, it's actually pretty decent, but I think we can bring a lot of those things up. Larger monitors for us would be huge. We have these little teeny tiny screens in front of us that are very difficult. And so we're trying to look at the big monitors in the back on these and then just trying to watch you guys as you talk. So I think the electronic part of it is huge. Overall, I think the investment in the city's downtown campus, I know for a fact that very soon we're going to be asked to approve some property very nearby just because the people found out that we were doing this renovation. And to me, that's the one thing that really sends I think a very strong note out to people that, we really like our downtown. This is the soul of Glendale. I don't care how you put it. This is the soul of downtown, the soul of Glendale. And I believe that the council has shown already that we're willing to invest in our city, that city downtown doesn't have to necessarily compete with Westgate. They don't have to compete with Arrowhead. Downtown is downtown. This is where the city's business is done, and the interest level that we've seen when we announced what we were doing here has dramatically come alive. So I'm excited about that. In all of these things that you showed us, I sure hope that you guys are thinking about pigeons. I know that we made a pretty good investment recently to try to solve that problem, so I'm hoping that as you design and do your thing that you do that. So I'll talk about the thing I don't like. I think this council I think we made it pretty certain that we wanted to stay within budget. I have a question for Mr. Phelps. Don't we have coming up in the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, I believe it's a CIP where we were going to be investing money in here, our council workshop already?
Mayor, members of the council, I believe in year 5, there's a placeholder in your CIP that you've adopted for roughly $4.5 million. So I think there was a recognition by the council that at some point this facility needed some fairly major updating. So I think accelerating it during when the whole campus is down would certainly make sense and would probably be more efficient from a cost perspective to do it as part of the broader project rather than to do it 5 years from now.
Okay, I thought that I'd remembered that. I couldn't remember what the dollar amount was. So if that is the case, I wouldn't be in support of the 5th floor. I personally, I don't think it's necessary. I tried to look at both sides. The place that you'd want to go up and stand outside. Man, by the time I get done looking at these pictures, why wouldn't I want to stand outside down where we've spent all the other money? I mean, this is going to be a beautiful campus. And so to me, going up there, we have a lot of locations that people can get that view. We're going to have hopefully a new hotel very close to here, and I'm not sure what they'll do, but I think we got a lot of places that people can go and enjoy downtown Glendale. Interior, I think for what the extra dollars would be for the space that you'd get, I think that I'd rather not spend that money. I think I'd like to stay with about the budget that we initially talked about. And if in the CIP in 5 years from now, it ends up being about the same amount of money as what we were going to spend anyway, I think it keeps us about where we wanted to be. So myself, I'm going to be asking everyone for a consensus to not approve that 5th floor, but approve everything else. But it's open for everybody. Who would like to speak next? Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. A couple of things. The 5th level, as much as I would like it, I'm not going to support it. It's too extravagant, and it's adding too much money to the budget. And I do think there is a point where we have to be fiscally conservative. With regard to the interior renovation of council, the fact that it's in the CIP already and would require moving those funds up, I can definitely support, excuse me, renovating the interior of city council. The garage, if it stays the way it looks now, but with a new skin, it's still ugly. And I, like the mayor, come from the west, and I see the ugly garage every day. So I would very much like to see that cladding go around the garage, and that will give it a whole different look. I'm very excited about this. I think there's an opportunity to do something that other cities don't have the ability to do. Other cities have to invest millions to create their downtowns. Goodyear is a good example. They spent $87 million to create a downtown when we already have it and have had it for nearly 40 years, at least the City Hall campus portion. So I think it's worth making the investment in a facility that will hopefully last another 40 or 50 years. And I do, just for clarification, I do want to break down the budget a little bit. And I kind of prepped you guys and told you that I wanted some figures. So let's talk about this for a minute. What do we have in the budget right now for the amphitheater?
Mayor and Council, Vice Mayor Clark, in rough numbers, and I know we do have the ability to probably get some accurate numbers after this, but in rough order of magnitude, I think we were talking roughly around 10.3-ish, 10.5 in.
Okay, let's just say 10 million for round numbers right now. How much are we going to invest in upgrading the park? Couple million, 3 million, 4 million?
Approximately 4.5 million is what we had.
3.5?
It was about 4.5 million for the park.
4.5? Parking garage. What's that going to cost us to fix that?
Project was 1.7, roughly 1.7 in the project by itself.
1.7?
Right.
Okay, now we're talking about a budget that's been approved of 84.6. And if you add all those together, that's, I'm not real good at this, 14, 15, 16.2. I do. I need my fingers and toes to count. What's the total of everything other than City Hall?
Yeah, so project cost versus construction. So if we do project, and I'm going to do round numbers, so 5 plus 12 plus 2 plus 4. So that's 17, 18, 22-ish.
22-ish.
And we can get you exact numbers.
So if you take 22-ish away from 84-ish,
62-ish.
you get 62-ish. And I think that's important to remember is what I'm supporting, for instance, does not add to the cost of the main City Hall building. It adds to the cost of the garage, which is at 1.7, and it adds to the cost of council chambers, which I didn't even ask you about.
That's about 4 right now, project cost.
Okay.
Without the interior.
Okay. So it's going to add to chambers and it's going to add to the parking garage, but we're holding the line right now on City Hall, which is the major nut of the project and the major cost, at somewhere around $62-ish million. And I think that doing that keeps us fiscally responsible, but yet adds elements that really should be considered being done now while we're going through the whole downtown renovation process. And there are a couple other comments that I want to make. This project and the announcement about doing this downtown renovation project has generated a lot of interest from a lot of outside sources who are now interested in developing downtown. And as the mayor stated, we have the possibility of a hotel, the first major hotel in downtown Glendale. Now, it doesn't rival Tempe's 28 stories, but it's a start in building our downtown into more than just what we have now. And so I think everything that we are doing helps benefit downtown merchants, downtown businesses, and also becomes a point of pride for every resident in Glendale who now drives by a Dunmuckle Brown City Hall, which will look new, refreshed, will stand out, and will be something that anyone who drives, I won't have to say, oh, look for the Dunmuckle Brown building at the intersection of 59th and Glendale, because they'll know City Hall's there when we're done. So I think that the two requests that I'm supporting are modest enough to support. And as much as I'd like a fifth floor, no, I'm not going to go there. Thank you, Mayor.
Mr. Milner, you're up.
Thank you, Mayor. I really like all of these proposed ideas that you've given to us today. I also like the idea of a solar, ceiling on the parking garage, mainly because there's some payback for that. However, I also know we need to be fiscally responsible. And I think that by pushing those right now, we can do at a later date. I believe the top floor, I really like the idea. I think it would be really great for employees to have that, and I think maybe down the road, this council, we should consider looking at that again. Same thing with our rooftop solar. I think they are projects that are worth considering. Again, I don't want to say they're dead. I want to say right now, to be fiscally responsible, I think we need to not do those projects at this time. I really like the thought that was given here earlier that we already have in our CIP to do some renovations here in this council chamber. And the amount of money is about $4.5 million. With that $4.5 million, we could do something now. Pull it back, a little bit back. I'd like to know where we're going to get the money from, of course, and how these extra funds will come about. Because one of the things that really is impressive about this entire project is this council has put together some economic development plans, some policies that have created a boon for the city, created some one-time monies that have flowed into the city due to the extreme amount of growth, the 22 million square feet of growth that have happened out in our western city along the 303. And as a result of that, we can use some of those funds and some other funds that we had, ARPA funds and a few other funds that we have in the city to do this project without asking the public to go into debt or to issue additional bond authority to do this. That, to me, is really says a lot for the planning of this entire council, that we've really planned for having some economic development that brings about some positive cash flows that allow us to build this, and we're not asking the taxpayers to pay for it. Well, in a sense, they do, because when the buildings out in the West Valley, if they ever use those buildings, the sales tax that came from them obviously are going to pay for this. but we're not taxing our local residents to do this absolutely incredible project. A couple of other things that have already kind of been mentioned, but just the ability for us to reinvigorate, to reinvest in downtown, as was stated here today. We already have people that are inquiring. We want to come into Glendale, downtown Glendale. We want to reinvigorate. I've had residents tell me many times, you know, what are you doing for downtown Glendale? What are you going to do to make that a nice place to go and be? And this is what that is. So not everybody has asked that, but I think enough people are saying, let's do something in downtown to make downtown Glendale a really modern looking and efficient place to be. Another thing that I'd like to talk about is our employees. I've also heard from residents many times that, you know, they come into our downtown campus and they're confused where to go. They're confused of how it's all laid out. The layout of our departments isn't very efficient. It's kind of dark and dreary, and even our employees, I'm sure they would have those kinds of concerns. This gives us an opportunity to correct that and to make it an opportunity for the entire staff of the city to really enjoy the place that they work. I'd like to, like I said, I'd really like to add a few more amenities for that, but I realize right now we need to be a little more fiscally responsible for our citizens to not add that additional cost now, but instead pull back into the current budget for this project from our COP, about the $4.5 million that would have gone to renovate this building here that we're in. So with that, I'm very much in support of moving forward with those two changes. I'm not interested right now in doing the solar panels, even though I want that to happen at some point in time, and not doing the the top of the building with the, you know, would be really fantastic, as I said. But I think right now, I think we're better off cutting that back a little bit and trying to be responsible, fiscally responsible. And so I think we do that. I think we'll have a product that the entire city will be very proud of. They're going to really enjoy coming to City Hall. Employees will enjoy coming to City Hall. And we're going to be a very refreshed, positive image for the entire West Valley. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to point out that this would bring the total up to right around $97 million if you add in the cost to relocate everybody for the process of vacating this building entirely. I just added up the two things that I believe there's going to be a consensus for. The council chambers, which I'd like to clarify. So there's $4.5 million in the CIP. How far out is that in the CIP? Is it in the next year, the year after that? Where is that in the CIP, the $4.5 million?
Mayor, members of the council, I think I said, I believe in year 5, but we can get back and confirm that.
Okay, and that's 4.5, but you're talking about doing it for $2.5 million? Because I've heard both numbers, so I want to make sure I understand what we're talking about. And then making that $4.5 million available for other uses. Who can answer that? The number here is $2.5 million, but somebody said $4.5 million, so.
Let him answer it.
I'll let the team kind of give more specifics, but we have money on, because all the mechanical changes out. So there was good in the base budget, there was going to be addressing the roof and portions of the building itself. This $2.5 million is touching the inside and adding on the executive session area. But there is money in the base budget because we're forced to have to bring up all the HVAC, electrical, plumbing, and make all those changes.
Okay, thank you. So I just want to make sure I had my math right. So, I mean, and I'm just going to start by saying, I mean, I know I'm one of the ones when I first got here was saying, This building, from the exterior especially, screams, we don't care. And how can we expect anybody to want to invest in downtown Glendale when we literally continue to just leave the building in the state that it's in? So I absolutely support an investment in this building. I have from the first day I got here. That being said, I believe this budget is indulgent. I think the priorities are a little misguided. We've got other things that I will be mentioning later that are not being funded, and there's, the investment in downtown is important and it's going to help, but one of the biggest problems in our downtown is crime. And until we take action to address the crime in our downtown, we can invest $1 gazillion in City Hall, and it's not going to make a difference down here. And I'm gonna have an item of interest that's going to talk about that. But we're literally, the actual cost, so taxpayers know what we're talking about, is $97 million. And so, I mean, not that an investment like this would ever give us a return on the investment, but the idea of generating, a return, it would have to be in the billions of dollars of taxable revenue generated down here to even come close to covering the cost. I think we started out at around $30 million for City Hall. And I understand costs have gone up, and I understand all of that, but my belief is that this price tag has become indulgent, and I think it's just too much with all the other priorities. We've got unfunded things all over the place here still, and I just think it's just too much money to be spending on something that's not going to serve, it's going to serve the employees. What we could do, we could have very nice workspace for employees. We could have very nice public spaces. We could have a nice looking building. We could have all of that, I believe, for far less money. So I just wanted to make sure that we got the actual total out here of being fiscally responsible. And I brought up early on that I thought this was going to be about $100 million, and we're at $97 million as of right now. Thank you.
Go ahead. Thank you, Mayor. Touch on a few things that you asked for input on. For the garage and the question of solar or not solar, to me that should be if the solar pays for itself and generates revenue, at least breaks even and potentially generates revenue, which hopefully it could, then I think that determines the question on whether we should go with it or not. There's also perhaps a benefit of having some of our own locally produced energy for in case of power failures or things like that. So there's perhaps a side benefit to that. But even if we don't do solar at this time, I think while we're doing everything we're doing, I would like to see that top floor shaded. So that it becomes not second-class parking for people, but just as every bit as acceptable as what we're providing elsewhere. And even if it means we then move, some of our motor pool that's stationed here at City Hall up to that level where, because we're parking it elsewhere because we don't want it being beat up by the sun, but we don't want our employees' cars being beat up by the sun or our visitors' cars. So I think that in this day and age, we need to provide covered parking up there. If solar makes more sense, I think we should do that. If not, we'll do the basic. I've come to like the screens for the stairways and the east side of the garage. I think the stairway or the screens on the west side of the garage are just overpowering, personally. I think half as much screen in height or breaking it up with some screen and some not screen to give it more, rather than just a big wall of screens and then of course the plantings. I give you a gold star for bringing the park onto the campus concept and extending the park-like feeling all the way over to 59th Avenue. I think that's a real plus and helps to, I think it speaks to who we are as a community, and it just what we want in our downtown. And we're looking at this oasis concept in our downtown, and so I like what I've seen in the artist renditions of that. I have not been a big fan of the 5th level, but after looking at the renditions, I could probably be supportive of that fifth level if, the concept of where it's got the glass wall, where it's enclosed, so it's workspace or reception space or boards and commission meeting space or all of those kinds of things that would be flexible but still provide a quality experience. And if the glass wall could be retractable, that then provided the terrace concept as well, so we get both concepts in one. It may be a little not even frosting on the cake, but the sprinkles in the frosting compared to the whole concept of things. But I think that could be something that we could use that would help showcase, in essence, showcase the work and the investment that we are making here to people who come here for other business reasons. It's been mentioned in the past that economic development, for instance, desiring to have a space in which to do their presentations from. And I could see that when we have other groups that are looking to meet in a nice space in the West Valley, that we could have them here for that. So that, I think, is the crux of it. I can support the changes, the improvements here to the council chambers. I look at it as basically we're taking the $4.5 million that we've been projecting 5 years out. We're moving it to the current time frame as long as we're doing all this work anyway, and we're actually getting more bang for our buck because it includes some things that we hadn't thought about doing, such as creating a conference room and that should be able to be used beyond just executive session meetings. It's an additional quality conference space for the city hall, city employees, for our downtown, all of that. And I think that if we use it that way, that it's worth the investment. It's a lot of money and it pains me terribly. I certainly wouldn't have been willing to spend this kind of money on the initial designs and drawings that we saw. But I think there's a whole lot more quality and community in what we're looking at now than what we saw initially. So I think we're in the ballpark. Thank you.
Thank you. So a few things. This project, as is, if we remain on budget, provides the aesthetics that the building needs for our community. It provides the city becoming a catalyst for development and revitalization for downtown. It does that, just keeping on budget. It also provides the improvements to the mechanical and the FF&D that's required for furnishing the building. It also improves significantly the working conditions for our employees. So nothing we add to this would, in my opinion, add to those four that I just said. And it would add, but I'm not sure that data would show that we're much better with them. Any dollars that would be going to renovate this building, the 2.5 or the 4.5, whichever, should be considered for the library that we only have design costs for. We don't have any dollars built in for the remodel. So we're going to complete this project, and then we are going to have a design hopefully in hand, but we don't have dollars for the library. So I couldn't support any additional budget for this project than as is. You all done a fantastic job in designing it thus far where we are. So I am not in favor of adding more scope. What we've done essentially is the industry calls scope creep. So we've creeped up pretty far, and we're adding, and you just don't know where to stop. And so I think we need to stop and be fiscally responsible and say we're done. We've met some goals. And the solar for the garage, there's nothing in the project that's adding that requires infrastructure that would make it easier for us to add solar later. So we can always add solar at a later date. Nothing prevents us from doing that later. Councilmember Tomalchoff and I were whispering to each other, can be a performance contract for that at a later date. So a lot of ways to finance solar, just don't need it right now. I would request that we maintain the budget that was already approved, stay on track. What's really important to me right now that we don't have is I guess we're 4 months away from starting this project, but we don't have strong timelines yet to share with our communities. So I think we need to hurry up and get to that point. But I'm not in favor of adding any more dollars to this project. If we do, it should be considered for the library remodel. But thus far, you're tracking on budget, and I would ask us to stay there. Thank you.
Mr. Hugh?
Thank you, Mayor. You mentioned something about being old. I look around the room, I realize I'm the oldest living person in Glendale that's here. Been here my whole life.
Why would we do it like that?
I talked with the mayor, who was George Renner, when they tore this city block down to create City Hall, and asked him how he was able to do it. And he said he couldn't do it, but he had a great city manager, Stan Vandepute, and a council behind him. And they displaced grocery stores, everything, and built the City Hall. And it was the right thing to do at the time. And it helped downtown Glendale for a good number of years. I was fortunate enough, 2 years after they opened it, I was elected to the council and served in here. And it's the same building today that I'm sitting in. 40 years have gone by. I agree, it needs to be fixed up. I never did think it was ugly until I saw something better. Yeah, it's an ugly building, and people realize it now. It was beautiful at one time. I think what you laid out, Mayor, is the proper plan, and I would support that and move forward. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I will ask for a consensus on what I initially suggested, and we'll see how it goes from there. Pretty much everything that you put out except for that 5th floor. I don't believe that. And there never was any dollar amount on solar. That wasn't even proposed.
Mayor, council members, no, we have some real rough numbers, but if you're interested, we would want to get more facts.
Yeah, I don't want to confuse this worse than it is right now. So that wasn't proposed. That wasn't in the dollar amount. The dollar amount that I know was in there was the 5th floor. Yes. And then the CIP picked up some of this over here, if we go that route. So that would be my question. Is there a consensus? No 5th floor add-on, but everything else that was laid out. The solar panels are not in the discussion right now.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Okay. Again, we need to, one more time.
Yes.
No.
No.
Okay, we do have a consensus. Are we clear? You're not clear?
Yes, Mayor, Council, we do have consensus. We understand.
Okay, all right, perfect.
We do have an additional slide just to wrap up the presentation, and that's just to discuss next steps. So to the point that the council has made, we still have a long way to go, and this decision today is hugely helpful for the team to proceed to the next step, and that is design development. So while you go on break over the summer, by the next 90 days or so, we'll have a better understanding of where we are with the design. I'll be roughly 60% plus in that range completion, and then that will be establishing some material selections. We will be studying the concept behind how Velma-Teague will integrate itself into this project in terms of the Murphy Park and how that blends. It was something that was asked before. So the Murphy Park will continue to be developed through and through over the course of that time. And then one big item that we would like to get to council for a vote and 90 days plus out will be an early GMP. That's a guaranteed maximum price terminology, and you approved one back in February for the Beat and Annex to get that project started with the team. This one would be for what we would need for demo package, long lead items, and abatement to get the project started. The early components of that lined up so that we can be for just-in-time delivery when we start the construction process for this project. So a lot of activity over the course of the next 90 days. We, of course, do our updates with Mr. Phelps each time with the council meets every month. So that gives you a big picture of where we're headed for the next 90 days or so.
Okay, and one final question for you. A question was asked just a few minutes ago. When will we get a closer idea as far as the timeline? Will you have a better idea of that in the next 60 days for us?
Roughly the next 60 days. We're working on that now. Now that we have this decision, quite frankly, Mayor and Council, with which the scope is going to be. Now we can actually look at the construction timeline, look at site logistics, how this is going to impact the downtown campus in terms of its operation, and come up with a construction plan for that. So we'll be able to begin to start modeling those dates over this next basically 30 days or so to help model that. But we won't be able to meet with you until August, I believe, since we're going on break. So early August, we'll have much more information to share with you on how the project timeline is shaping up and what the early construction logistics will be for this project.
Okay, well, I'm excited about it because I think what we just did was sealed the fate for downtown Glendale. I think we're going to see a lot of interest now where people now go, okay, they really are doing this. It's not just talking about it. So I'm excited about that.
We are too, Mayor and Council. Thank you for your time today, and we appreciate the consensus to move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Bauer, item 5.
General fund, fund balance update, and policy review.
Mayor, members of the council, here to provide staff report on the last item for today's agenda is
I'm sorry, item 6.
Assistant City Manager Vicki Rios, and she's accompanied by Levi Gibson, our Director of Budget and Finance.
I said 5, number 6.
6, yes.
You're good, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. And good afternoon, Mayor and Council. We're here today to discuss the fund balance policy for the general fund. In the way of an agenda, we're first going to talk about what fund balance is from a definition. We're also going to talk about GASB 54, which is the accounting standard for fund balance. For the general public, GASB stands for the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, and that's the rule-setting board for how we build and present our financial statements as a government. We'll also talk about the GFOA best practices recommendations. GFOA stands for the Governmental Finance Officers Association. That's a professional association of governmental finance professionals. We'll also talk about the current Glendale Fund balance, general fund balance policy. We'll also look at some valley-wide comparisons, and then we will make a recommendation, and we will be looking for consensus for that recommendation. First of all, fund balance, the definition from a accounting point of view is that the general fund balance is defined as the excess of fund assets over liabilities in the general fund at a specific point in time. And that can be represented by the equation there, general fund assets minus general fund liabilities equal fund balance. And from an accounting standpoint, we typically measure that at June 30th for our balance sheet presentation. Getting into GASB 54 accounting standard. So this standard was issued in 2009 and sought to provide consistency, comparability, and understandability in the reporting of fund balance. Prior to that, governments kind of did what they wanted. They put things into certain categories and called things different names. And so it was hard for the users of the financial statements to make direct comparisons. Accounting statement number 54 provided us a hierarchy basis for fund balance based on the nature of the constraints on how the funds can be spent. That fund balance is separated into 5 categories. That's non-spendable. These are amounts that can't be easily converted to cash or spent. So the easiest thing to consider is inventories. If you have a lot of inventory, you can't just go out and convert that readily to cash and spend it on the dime. The next category is restricted. This is a category where it's constrained by the provider. Typically in government, that can be a grant provider, that can be somebody maybe who has made a donation, and they provide or they have some restrictions on how those funds are used. The next category is committed, and these are amounts that are constrained by the government. Those are amounts that you as a council can constrain. The next category is assigned, And these amounts are intended for a specific purpose. So those are typically assigned by the city manager in accordance to what we've allocated in the budget. The next category is unassigned, and this is an amount that can be used for any purpose, and it's only reported within the general fund. So you'll only find this category within the general fund. Those categories are from the least spendable to the most spendable. Next, we want to talk about the kind of the best practices that we get from the Government Finance Officers Association. This recommends that governments should establish a policy regarding fund balance. The policy should always include guidance for what the prescribed level of fund balance is. The guidance should also be provided for how to replenish fund balance if it falls below that prescribed level. And it recommends, at a minimum, government maintain unrestricted budgetary fund balance in their general fund of no less than 2 months of either regular general fund operating revenues or regular general fund operating expenditures. Each government is unique in how its revenues and expenditures are incurred, and so that's why this recommendation gives both the option for operating revenues and operating expenditures. So currently, our minimum fund balance in the general fund is defined as the unassigned amount shall be 25% of the total annual ongoing revenues. This provides a continuing continuity of services. It provides us a cushion in economic downturns. It provides use for emergencies, loss of revenue, other unanticipated needs, could be for non-recurring obligations or any other unforeseen opportunities. One of the things that we looked at as we is we wanted to compare ourselves to other Valley cities and what they've done in the way of fund balance policies. So we took a look, I surveyed the other finance directors throughout the Valley. We took a look at their financial policies, and we can see, beginning in Avondale, that they typically set aside 35% of actual general fund expenditures from the prior fiscal year. Chandler sets aside 25% of their budgeted general fund revenues. They exclude transfers in. Gilbert sets aside 25% and they title it working capital. And working capital can be defined as current assets minus current liabilities. Phoenix sets aside 5% in a contingency, and this slide should say general fund expenditures. Mesa has a policy of between 8 and 10% of budgeted general fund expenditures for the following year. Peoria has a policy of 35% of average actual general fund revenues for the previous 5 years. Scottsdale sets aside 20% of general fund operating expenditures. Surprise is 25% of general fund operating expenditures. Tempe is between 20 and 30% of actual general fund current year operating revenues. And then Goodyear's policy just simply says they will be greater than 15% of budgeted general fund ongoing revenue. So as you can see, there's a vast difference in how each city, even within the same valley, calculates their fund balance policy. But it can basically be broken down into the two areas that we saw based on the recommendation, either on revenues or on expenditures. And with that, I'll turn over the presentation to Ms. Rios.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Mayor, members of the council, I'm going to ask Mr. Gibson to go back one slide. So now that you've kind of seen what some of the other cities do, and as Mr. Gibson said, they usually put their policy either on the basis of revenues or expenditures, you can see there are a couple of issues with our policy. Now, when I got here, we didn't have a policy at all. These were something that Mr. Dunsing at the time and I worked on. And our policies greatly mirrored the city of Tempe policies because that's where he came from. But one thing I want to point out about this policy is compared to some of the other policies, it doesn't define what year. We have to assume we mean the total ongoing revenues either from the prior year or from the upcoming year, or maybe it's the budgeted revenues, or maybe it's the actual revenues. It's not really very clearly defined. So we have to begin with making an assumption about what year and time frame this policy is referring to. And then in addition to that, estimating the annual ongoing revenues, and I will use the word estimating very strongly, is only an estimate. If I do the estimate of them and Mr. Gibson does the estimate and then Councilmember Clark does the estimate, every one of us is going to come up with a slightly different number based on our assumptions. And in the past and when we have done it, that's kind of what we've done. Everybody kind of looks together and does kind of their estimate, and then we come to some agreement as to what we think those are. It is an unscientific method, and it depends on the assumptions that you're making. And again, in this case, it's not clearly defined. Are you talking about last year's revenues? Are you talking about 5 years of revenues? Are you talking about the next year's of revenues? Because it's just not clearly defined. Next one. So because of that, and because of looking at some of the other policies, at this point in time, staff is going to make a recommendation that we change that policy. It is your policy, so we need a consensus from you to do that. But what we're thinking and what we're recommending is to change it to 25% of the budgeted ongoing expenditures. There are a few reasons why. Number one, it just makes more sense. It's saying at the end of one fiscal year, set aside a reserve that is equal to 25% of the next year's expenditures. We know what that number is because we just passed a budget, and we're able to pull out any of the one-time expenditures. We know what those are, and we can absolutely calculate that number. It's not based on assumptions that we have to make. It's a real number that is easily calculated at the end of the year. And as Mr. Gibson pointed out earlier, it's always calculated at the end of the year. Having it calculated at the end of the year based on something that already happened doesn't quite make as much sense as calculating it on the year that is coming up and setting aside 25%, which is basically 3 months of your expenses, so that if something happens that is in some type of devastating manner to the city, you have that set aside as a reserve. So we would be, again, making that recommendation at this time. It will simplify the process. It's much easier to calculate. But I do want to show you, and we can go to the next slide, kind of what that would mean for the city. So we based this on fiscal year '22. If we had that policy in place in '22, which is the last year that we closed out the year, the budgeted general fund ongoing expenditures were $221 million. The one-time expenditures were $2.6 million. So we could have calculated, if we had used a new policy, that the unassigned fund balance should be $55.4 million. Again, much more straightforward and easier to calculate.
Mayor.
Next slide.
Yeah, hold on. Go ahead.
So slide 9 there, you just said, here's what it would be if you calculated under your new recommended policy. What would that number be based on our current policy?
Mayor, members of the council, I'm going to show you that on the next slide.
Okay.
And actually, let me rephrase that. I'm going to show you that for the '23 budget, because that's the budget we're entering. I don't have a calculation of what it would have been on the '22 budget. We could do that, but I don't have that in front of me, so I don't know.
Mayor, if I could,
the
it
answer is.
seemed to me like it was around 77 million when we were kicking this around a few weeks ago.
Mayor, members of the council, again, that was based on the '23 budget, not the '22 budget. The number I just showed you was based on the '22 budget. So this Now I'm going to show you based on the '23 budget what that would be, but I don't have something to go back in time and tell you what it would have been on the '22 budget. Just making sure we understand what I'm saying.
Were you done?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I've been emailing back and forth trying to, is it because that we don't, that number, the number for the 2022 ongoing operating revenues, I've been asking, so does that number, I know we did, on April 25th, I think it was, we did a 5-year forecast. We forecasted 5 years worth of operating revenues, but do we not have, I understand you're saying forecasting is forecasting and you can't, there's no certainty in forecasting, but couldn't we base it on the previous fiscal year's ongoing operating revenues? Because do we not have that number? I mean, I understand you don't know the number off the top of your head right now, but what I was trying to understand is, could we just use rather than forecasting, we could use last year's ongoing operating revenue?
Mayor, members of the council, if I understand the question correctly, what we set aside last year in unassigned fund balance was roughly $55 million. That means we were assuming that the ongoing revenue was $220 million. Again, someone else could calculate it, they could get another number, it would be another number, but at that time,
That's not what I'm asking.
Let her finish,
Okay,
please.
but that's not the
at that
question.
time, we estimated those ongoing revenues to be $220 million, and we set aside in the unassigned fund balance $55 million.
Okay, but what I'm asking is, rather than forecasting what that would be, looking back to the previous year, knowing what the number is and using that number, 25% of the previous year's ongoing operating revenues. I'm not asking about forecasting. I'm asking about using, now we know what that number is. So you're saying forecasting, and I understand. Forecasting can be, it's forecasting, but when we have a number to look in the rearview mirror at, why couldn't we just use that number? That's what I'm asking. Because now we know what the number is. So every year the fund balance could be based on last year's number of ongoing operating revenue, rather than trying to forecast what it is.
Mr. Phelps.
So the question is, can we? And yes, you can. All it takes is the council policy to say that's how you want to calculate it. What the team has done is really gone and really looked through this and spent a lot of time carefully looking at it to say what's probably the best way to do it, which is the recommendation, which is to do the 25% based on the approved budget going forward on the ongoing expenditures. But can you do it on a different measure? Councilmember Tomachoff, yes, you can do really whatever you want. We're just coming forward with you after having spent a lot of time in the Budget and Finance Department and looking at different policies, and we believe this is a very prudent, very conservative, and a very predictable way to do it that would get into a really good rhythm and be very easy to call out each year during the budgeting process. But your question, can we? Yes, you can.
Okay, Mayor, if I could. So the issue with doing that is essentially based on where we're at now, and we're forecasting the 23 ongoing operating revenue at a little over $300 million, which gets us to the $75 million fund balance policy. So this policy brings it to a lower number. It essentially reduces that based on these numbers down by about 17%, somewhere around $20 million. So that's why I think obviously always the operating ongoing revenue number is going to be higher than the ongoing operating expenditures number. And for my 2 cents worth, I think a higher fund balance, especially now when we have the ability to easily accomplish that, is better prepare for the future or what may or may not happen.
Mayor?
Thank you.
If I could just, we're thinking about it in the prospective, assuming that revenues grow. But I think one of the things we looked at, what happens when you go into a budget year where revenues decrease? And it does happen. It could be decreased because of state revenue changes and assumptions for our taxation. So now you would be in a situation where actually going into a year where revenues could be less than what you'd seen in a prior year, and you're reducing down your fund balance. So doing it on expenditures, because what will happen is, even though your revenues go down, it may take time to ramp down your expenditures. So in that particular scenario, it would be more conservative and I think more prudent for the council to say, let's base our reserve fund on what we expect to spend, not on what we expect to come, because we have such little control over what comes in, and in terms of the cadence of how that money comes in.
Could Mayor also add a threshold?
Is your microphone on?
We'd have to ramp down expenditures. Obviously, if your revenue dipped enough to really create a big dip in the fund balance, but you could also say, 25% of the previous year's ongoing operating revenue not to go below 55 million. You could do that too, so that it wouldn't. I mean, anything can be changed. If the economic conditions required us to change our fund balance, we could do that. I just don't see any reason to do it now, because it essentially reduces down our fund balance, makes more money to spend available in the amount of about $20 million, at least right now. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Mr. Mellor?
Thank you, Mayor. When I think of budget, I think of expenditures. Obviously, you have the revenue side, where you get your money from to spend. But to me, when we have a reserve fund, we have it in reserve in order to cover the expenses that we have as a city. So if we had a downturn in our revenues, for example, and we as council decided that we wanted to keep our services status quo. We don't want to cut services like we did in the 2008 recession, where we cut library hours and many other cuts in parks and streets and everywhere else. That's the purpose of the fund balance, is to have a reserve where you could reach into that fund balance and cover the expenditures. That's what we would use it for, to cover the expenditures. And so it only makes sense to me that our policy would be to have a percentage of expenditures, so that when that happens, and it will happen, we'll have a recession again, and we'll have that money available to cover the expenditures. And I believe the 25% is reasonable. It was, as discussed, it was recommended as part of the national standards. So I think it fits very well to moving forward from here out. In the past, we've always discussed or talked about this $50 million balance, which was probably may have exceeded these percentages. And then we got to the $50 million balance, and we never really discussed it any further. So I think moving it to this, I think, makes it very simple, makes it simple for me to understand, and makes it much easier for staff to calculate. We can know those numbers throughout the budget process a little easier than trying to finagle with the revenue numbers. So I would be very much in favor of changing this policy to the 25% of ongoing expenditures. Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
I don't pretend to be a genius, and I'm not a former banker when it comes to city budgetary policy, but I do like staff's recommendation. It's simple to understand. I mean, when we do our own budgets for our families, if we know we're going to say have $50,000 coming in that year, and we know we need to put some aside, we can say, okay, we know this is the amount of money we're going to have this year. Let's put 10% aside for emergencies or whatever. And that's essentially what the city is doing. I think your recommendation is the cleanest way to do it, is to look at what we're expecting to spend that year and saying, okay, we're going to put 25% aside. Makes sense to me. I support staff's recommendation. Thank you.
Mr. Turner, you're up.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, so it seems like we got a couple of issues here. One is Do we want to base it on expenditures, or do we want to base it on revenues? And out of the 11 cities, us included, that we have data from here, out of 11, 5 of them do it on revenues and 6 of them do it on expenditure. So there's no real indication there from our peer group as which is better. So there's that question. Then there's the other question of what's the right percentage for Glendale? Now, I don't understand how Phoenix does it with 5%, but you know, there's a number that we would think would be right for Glendale. To me, and this is money we don't intend to touch, as far as I see it. This is money we don't intend to touch except in a worst-case scenario. This isn't because revenues failed 2.5%. We can dip into this to make up for it. This is what we don't go after except the worst-case scenario. I remember a few years back, before the last recession, as I recall, the city, a smaller city, ours, but smaller, had over 70 million in reserves and went through it like it didn't exist at all. It disappeared very, very quickly. So, you know, I don't want to err on the small side. So it does seem to me that what we're trying to do is to protect our ability to meet our planned expenditures. Doesn't mean that we can't get quickly to work and roll back what we plan on doing. You know, we can always adjust our budget downward if we see revenue shortfalls or things like that, and that's the prudent thing to do, but we can't do it 100%, you know, across the board. So it's about protecting our ability to meet our expenses. So I think that we should base it on expenses. And 25%, you know, several of these other cities are higher, 35%, 35%, 30%. I'd be more comfortable with more rather than less. So I'd be comfortable with like 30% of our ongoing expenses. If it, you know, I realize, and then the other trade-off is that every dollar we declare as reserved and untouchable is a dollar we can't put to use providing for the desires of our constituents. And then you have to balance which is worse, to not meet all of our desires or to fall woefully short in the event of a downturn. So I'd like to see 30%, but I can deal with 25%.
Okay, Mr. Aldama, you're up.
Thank you. Yeah, I trust and believe in the recommendation staff's brought to us. It provides certainty and accuracy. And Ms. Rio's comment on the way it is now on revenue, if any one of your staff were to calculate, we'd come up with a different calculation. If you do it on expenditures, it's always the same amount, whether I'm doing it, he's doing it, or you doing it. So it provides that really, really clean way of calculating the fund balance. So I'm for your recommendation. I'm really concerned, though, that we don't have a policy on when we can draw and how much we can draw and what it's for. And so this policy is exempt from that, or you have something else that will include that?
Mayor, members of the council, this is a snippet out of the policy. There are other parts of the policy that say when you can draw upon it, and also how fast you have to replenish it, or you don't have to, but the policy says you will replenish it within 5 years, or you'll make every attempt to replenish it within 5 years if you dip below that. And it does, I don't have the exact wording of it, I can get that for you, but it does have some provisions for when you can dip into it.
Thank you for that. Does that portion of the policy need to be brought to us for discussion, or has it been efficient that this is the reason why you didn't bring it today?
Mayor, members of the council, that portion of the policy has been working fine. That's part of how we built up the fund balance that we did have. This is the number again, and the mayor talked about it at his State of the City address, that was negative when I got here. It was a negative number. That is a very bad thing. And so we spent all this time trying to set aside every year, as Councilmember Clark said, something to put it in reserve. This matters to our rating agencies, that it is there and that we have this policy in place and that we don't use it except in the case of a dire emergency, and that we replenish it.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning that. I'm very proud to have been on the council to have replenished that negative balance and where we are today. I just don't want us to, just because we have it, we can use it. So having that policy in place is the good thing, the best thing to do. To Councilmember Turner's question, where did the 25%, can you remind us where the 25% amount came from, and why do we remain on 25%?
Mayor, members of the council, the minimum that is recommended by GFOA is 2 months, which is about 18%. That's a very minimum. We believe that it should be higher than that minimum, and as Levi said, every government is slightly different, but you notice here in Arizona they're higher, and it's because of our dependence on sales tax. Other types of entities, especially East Coast entities, are more reliant on property tax, and property tax is not as volatile. But as we saw during COVID, and as we've seen several times over the history of this city, sales tax is more volatile, and it is impacted by an economic downturn and can be impacted drastically in a very short period of time. So we think it's better to have a little bit more than the minimum, and we just settled on 25%. It's pretty much in line with what the other cities have. Some have more, but it's also a balance, as Councilmember Turner said, between putting too much into reserve, where then you're having to cut back some type of services that you're providing to the public. In addition to that, I did want to address real quick, the reason why Phoenix is so low at 5%, 5% for them is still a very big number because they're 10 times as large as we are. So that's a very big number. And so they can afford to have a smaller percentage because small percent is still a huge number.
If our sales tax was lower, would we have a lower fund balance percentage? It would require us to have a lower.
Mayor, members of council, again, if we weren't as reliant upon sales tax, yes, we could probably get away with somewhere around 20%. That's probably, again, why Tempe has a range, 20 to 30. But we think 25% is a good sweet spot. You know, it's not the average of these cities. It's just a good spot. It's easy. Everybody can remember it. And it's again, it's just our recommendation.
Yeah. So there's always a guessing game on the revenues, and there is on expenditures too until it's done, but that's what you're doing is when it's final and we close out the fiscal year, we have a number based on that, and I'm comfortable with your recommendation.
Thank you, Mayor. Turn that on this time. It's on. I do have a question, though. On the agenda tonight for the final budget adoption, on page 17 under fund reserves and structure, what we're adopting tonight says the minimum fund balance in the general fund, which is defined as the unassigned amount, shall total 25% of the total annual ongoing revenue. That's what we're adopting tonight. So
Mayor, members of the council, we thought about the idea of, if council gave us consensus today, of providing some language for you to adopt that this evening. But out of respect for council and the fact that it causes, you know, amendments on the agenda and that type of thing, what we would prefer to do instead is bring it to you at the next meeting. So you adopt it today as is, but on the 27th, before the end of the fiscal year, we will bring back all of the financial policies with that change in them, and they can be adopted again, and then they will take full force for the next, for, you know, the remainder of the time. And for this year, because they were adopted during this fiscal year.
Okay, Mayor, if I could, just to, just for kind of a context of what the $55.5 million essentially does, the cost to operate the city is about $1.63 million a day. Based on what our operating budget's going to be, it's 585 or 595, I don't know, it's 585 or 595 million dollars for this next fiscal year, which is $1.63 million a day. And I know we would never be where like all of the money we're using to operate the city comes from fund balance, but that literally would only last 34 days, just for the context. So I think more is better. Thank you.
I'm going to wrap it up. I'm amazed that we're discussing this when today I actually read that we got another bond increase rating. So I guess the reason I bring that up is I do trust, Ms. Rios, what you and your team have done. I think think you've done a remarkable job where we were triple B with a negative outlook literally 10 years ago today, where we're virtually, if I'm not mistaken, A's and A positives all the way across, which is pretty phenomenal, which allows us to save more money in the fact that we don't have to have as high interest rates that we're paying on some of these bonds, which saves our citizens money. I do agree to a point with Mr. Turner. It would be nice if we had more, but at this point, I'm comfortable with your recommendation. What I'd like to do is start looking at ways that we can get some things done that some of the citizens have asked us for that we've been putting off. And so maybe by not putting additional money in, maybe we can start looking at some of that. And I think every council member up here would like to start thinking about that, but we got another year to go on that. With that, I'm going to ask for consensus as the staff presented.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, we do have consensus.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, with that said, city manager report, Mr. Phelps.
Mayor, members of the council, we'll go from budget policy to chicken. We're now finally at the time when we'll be the first to announce publicly the actual official date to open Chicken and Pickle in Westgate, and that is going to take place on July 18th, which is a Tuesday, and we understand you'll be getting an invitation to go there. The facility is just absolutely incredible. I think you're going to really, it's just one more layer of experiential retail that's coming to this area. They've got numerous pickleball courts, including they've got really a kind of almost a stadium court where they can bring in touring professionals to play, and so there are stands and people can watch them play from there. But they also have other activities that you can do there, so it's not just about the pickleball. So they'll have a host of other games. They'll have food and beverage. So we're real excited about it. We hope you'll be able to, we know you, some of you may be traveling in the month of July, but you'll get an invitation for that. And again, congratulations to the, to Westgate, just another great project. And this adds 200 new jobs to our area, and so we're happy for all of our newly employed residents. They'll be getting a job there as well. And that concludes my remarks.
Thank you. City Attorney's report.
Nothing this evening, thank you.
Council items of special interest. Mr. Aldama.
None at this time.
Thank you. Councilmember Hugh.
None, Mayor.
Councilmember Melner.
Nothing today.
Councilmember Tomachoff.
Nothing today.
Councilmember Turner.
Not today, Mayor.
Vice Mayor.
Nothing today.
And I'm not going to blow that. I mean, we got a consensus going here. Let's keep it. Nothing for me. Motion to go into executive session. Can I get that?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, vote nay. Appears the ayes have it. Do have it. We're recessed.